This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. Where to start today? I had a conversation with a younger colleague this morning who is still a little puzzled, or no, taken aback, I think, rather than puzzled, by the scale of the reaction to Rishi Sunak's decision to come back from the D-Day commemoration early. And, we talked about it at enormous length, didn't we, last Friday? And I'm taken aback by the fact that she's taken aback. Because for me, and it may be a generational thing, I'm not as young as I used to be. For me, it is such a black and white. It is so binary. It is still beyond my comprehension that a conversation was conducted in which people expressed the idea that it would be a good thing, or in any way even feasible, to come back early from the D-Day commemorations and not be present for the ceremony where the German Chancellor, the American President and the French President convened for the cameras, but also, of course, for the commemoration. I won't labour this point unduly because it's a bit personal, really, but I think it's the biggest political miscalculation of my life. And because it wasn't spontaneous, you can't put it up there with Gordon Brown calling a bigoted woman a bigoted woman. You can't put it up there with Neil Kinnock's triumphalism on the eve of the 1992 election, although a rather splendid full disclosure interview that I did with Lord Kinnock, he challenges that narrative quite persuasively, but it's certainly how it reached the people that he was celebrating before the results were even in. I mean, what else is up there? What are the epic... I mean, the poll tax, I suppose, is an epic political calculation, but that's on a policy level rather than a behaviour level. I'm thinking of behaviour, misjudgment, miscalculation, call it what you will. I think genuinely that it's the biggest of my life. For a Prime Minister, and you think the context and the detail is so important here, to come back early in the middle of an election campaign on the 80th anniversary, not like the 73rd or the 82nd, but on the 80th anniversary, the last big one that will be attended by veterans. Oh, there's a thought. Crikey. God bless them. The last big anniversary, as in one with a 0 or possibly a 5 in it, but certainly with a 0, the last big anniversary that will actually be attended by veterans, or by an appreciable number of veterans. And the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, a country that, for good or for ill, holds D-Day events in a reverential space, he decides to come home early. I mean, I genuinely can't think of anything that is even on the same page for a misjudgment. And I think that everything comes from there. I think that Partygate, they didn't think they'd get caught, Carl. Fella suggests David Cameron calling the Brexit referendum. All right, that's up there. But again, that's like the poll tax, isn't it? That's policy. That's carefully thought through policy. This is a decision taken in a moment, or a step taken in a moment, in a nanosecond. I can't think of a bigger misstep, a bigger misjudgment, a bigger gaffe. Gaffe's a good word. I can't think of a bigger gaffe. And I don't think you'll be able to top it either. Not from, living memory or relatively recent British politics. So back he comes to the United Kingdom to conduct an interview with Paul Brand at ITV News. Now, I mean, it's a pre-recorded interview. His excuse for coming back early kind of made a mockery of the idea that he was coming back to do the interview, because his excuse for coming back early was that it was all in the schedule already. And, I've had two people get in touch suggesting that Michael Foot wearing a duffel coat to the cenotaph was on a par with Rishi Sunak coming back early from D-Day. But as a mark of why that doesn't compare, one of them's joking and one of them is being serious. And listen, I'm not criticising or siding with either. But one texter says that his father, who was a military veteran, considered Michael Foot's coat at Remembrance Sunday to be an absolutely unforgivable offence. And then someone else is suggesting as a joke that we've forgotten about Michael Foot's coat. But anyway, coming back early, obviously it's not on the same scale by any measure as a choice of overgarment. And he came back He came back, he said, because the schedule had been established long before the election was called, which means he was coming back anyway. There's not even an argument for saying he was rushing back to do this interview, in which, of course, he doubled down on the lies about taxes and managed to stick his foot in his mouth on at least 2 more occasions as well, which we'll look at shortly. But I mean, the mind boggles still, doesn't it? And I don't know, if it wasn't such a busy news agenda, we might spend an hour explaining to my younger colleagues why this is such an extraordinary moment, why this is why the reaction has been so violent. But we haven't got time today. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. Well, let's have a little look at these 2 foot-in-mouth moments. The first, actually, the first involves D-Day. And listen, you know that Farage has tried to make racist capital out of Rishi Sunak's ethnicity by saying he doesn't understand our culture or he doesn't understand our history, and then backpedaling, like he always does, in an unconvincing fashion by claiming he was talking about wealth and privilege or class, which of course would mean that Richard Tice doesn't understand our history or our culture, or King Charles doesn't understand our history or our culture. But you're never supposed to analyse Nigel's little get-out-of-jail-free cards. You're supposed to just let him wash over you with his dog whistles being registered by the people that they're intended for, and the still relatively ill-equipped media not quite knowing how to amplify the noise so that absolutely everybody can hear it. That point there is one that you need to bear in mind, because I don't think that Sunak is unpatriotic or unappreciative of the sacrifices made at D-Day. I really don't. I don't. I think my politics are pretty obvious. Certainly my attitude to the looming election is as clear as day. But I never want to be one of those people that would deploy dishonest tactics or even disingenuous tactics in order to denigrate or malign political characters or political figures that I don't like. You don't need to. There's plenty of stuff that's just true with which to criticise people without having to make stuff up. You start making stuff up, you're into Donald Trump territory. Do you know what Donald Trump fans are saying about Hunter Biden's convictions? So what slightly, people who perhaps don't pay as much attention as you do have seen that Hunter Biden has been convicted on all 3 charges against him regarding gun offences, firearms offences, which sort of optimistic, naive people would immediately think, well, that drives a coach and horses through Donald Trump's claims that the justice system is rigged against him, doesn't it? Because Joe Biden's son has been convicted. He's unlikely to go to jail because it's a first offence, but Joe Biden's son has been convicted. So how will they be able to possibly claim that the justice system is rigged against Donald Trump? Guess what they're doing? They're claiming that Joe Biden has deliberately had his son convicted under the rigged and biased justice system, so that they'll be able to claim that the justice system isn't rigged and biased. If you're once you've fallen in love with a racist liar, you will convince yourself of absolutely anything to continue believing his racist lies and his bogus victimhood. So Sunak is not unpatriotic. Sunak is fully aware of the importance of D-Day. He is. He was visibly moved. Him and his wife do work away from the campaign trail involving veterans. I say all of this with an absolutely straight face. It is disgusting to suggest that his appalling political judgment last week in any way reflects a deeper truth about his attitude towards the sacrifices of D-Day. He was appallingly badly advised. The optics, call it what you will, but it is disgusting to suggest that his ethnicity has anything to do with what he did, or indeed that his patriotism can be called into question. But it is incontrovertible evidence that he's just very bad at politics. I said to you about 3 weeks ago that once the aroma of ridiculousness, once the aura of ridiculousness has engulfed a senior politician, you can never really get rid of it. Think of it as layers. It's quite good, this. Think of it as layers. So there's a reason why the straw that broke the camel's back is a figure of speech, because a straw doesn't weigh much. But if the burden is already huge, then it in a sense, it never stops growing. So today's comments, and we'll look at them in a second, they may not strike you immediately as being particularly thick layers upon the pile of evidence that he's rubbish at politics. But that doesn't matter, because it's another layer. You're spreading another layer of bad at politics butter on this already overloaded bagel. And that is where he is now. That's why he was so flat yesterday. That's why he gives the impression of wanting to be anywhere else but in the middle of this election campaign. That's why it's increasingly difficult not to conclude that he just wants it all to be over. In fact, to deploy Occam's razor, looking at why he called an election so unexpectedly and so surprisingly, I think the most persuasive answer to the question right now is that he just wants to be out. He just wants to be out as soon as he humanly can. So he's called an election. Yesterday's speech was extraordinary in its flatness, in its lack of not just content, but also delivery, not even sort of trying, if you like, to gee up the troops. And this is what happened. So first of all, he manages somehow, and it's spur of the moment, and he won't have fully appreciated that it was being filmed, yada, 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 yada. He manages to make his D-Day debacle look even worse than it did already.
Prime Minister.
Gosh, hello.
Good to see you.
Very nice to see you. Hey, sorry to
I'm
have
well,
kept
thank
you.
No, not at all. I know you've been in Normandy.
Yeah, it all just ran over. It was incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was
so apologies for keeping you.
No, not at all. I'm sure it was a powerful trip. I mean, so pertinent as well this year, considering what's happened in Ukraine.
Yeah, which I haven't seen President Biden's remarks, but I think that's kind of the echo, I think, what he said.
Did you get to meet any of the veterans, or were you...
Oh, no,
did you
gosh,
just
lots.
have to do the ceremonial...
Lots. Over yesterday and today. Yeah, I've already spoke to almost everyone that was there, I hope.
It ran over. Bloody veterans banging on about the war. Honestly, who do they think they are? And they know I've got better things. I'm supposed to be back in London to sit down with Paul Brand for a pre-recorded interview in which I'm going to double down on my lies about taxes and make ludicrous claims about my underprivileged childhood. That flipping veteran. I tell you what, the state of those veterans wanging on about the war. Whatever happened to war, not jaw, it's jaw. I mean, just, what's the word I'm looking? Is it tin-eared? Is it a lack of judgment? It's just been very bad at politics, isn't it? So I'm terribly sorry I'm late. I was in Normandy. I'm terribly sorry I was in Normandy and it overran. Come on. I was toying with the idea this morning of giving you a 50-50, of asking you which of these two gaffes was worse. But I thought that might be a little childish. However, this is the second gaffe.
When you are wealthier than the king, what do you do day to day to make sure you're still in touch with the kind of struggles ordinary people face? Have you ever gone without something?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, my family emigrated here with very little, and that's how I was raised. I was raised with the values of hard work.
What did you go without as a child?
We went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example?
All sorts of things. Like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV. Okay. So that was something that we never had growing up, actually. But it was lots of things. But again, that's my experience is obviously going to be what my experience was, what is more important are my values and how I was raised. And I was raised in a household where hard work was really important. You had to work very hard, and family was important, service to your community was important.
I suppose it's possible that he didn't appreciate the importance of D-Day because he didn't have Sky History when he was a kid, although I'm probably getting my ears slightly muddled there. Now, again, I'm not suggesting you have any sympathy for him. I'm simply suggesting that is evidence not that he is necessarily devoid of empathy or completely out of touch with reality, but that he's just really bad at politics. So I went to private school, and we didn't have Sky TV as a kid. But you've heard me say that in order to pay the school fees, my mum and dad never went on fancy holidays. The fanciest holiday we went on was a caravan in Normandy, appropriately enough, actually. So, Brittany, I beg your pardon, Brittany. We also went on holiday in Normandy, but that wasn't in a caravan. And I could say that my mum and my dad never had fancy cars, or that when we got towards the end of the month, sometimes you would know that my dad was waiting for his expenses to be cashed, for his expenses to arrive. But they were expenses from the Daily Telegraph. So the idea that you would use this as evidence of going without is it's absurd. What would you have said? If you were Rishi Sunak, how would you have answered that question? You just would have said, well, look, obviously we didn't go out, we didn't go without anything. In a meaningful sense. We certainly didn't go hungry. certainly didn't go to school in shoes that had holes in them. We certainly didn't have to choose between eating and heating. Obviously, I'm incredibly lucky, and it's that sort of comfort, that sort of security that I want to provide for the entire country. It's not difficult to do this, but he can't, because that's not the only time that he's sounded this tin-eared, is the kindest way I can think of putting it. There's this famous example as well.
I have friends who are aristocrats, I have friends who are upper class, I have friends who are, working class, but not working class.
That's when he was in the sixth form, and that little throwaway line at the end there, well, not working class, I think speaks volumes. So, what's wrong with him? It's not possession or privilege. I suspect our upbringings were quite similar. Maybe there was a little bit more cash sloshing around the Sunak household because my mum was working in Owen Owens on the perfume counter, whereas his mum had her own chemists. But I suspect in order to send him to public school, the kind of financial prioritisation rather than sacrifice was similar, I love the Maury Camby. I love the fact that you now finished the Maury Camby story for me without me having to even mention it. If you've got no idea what I'm talking about, then you haven't been listening to the programme for long enough. But what's wrong with him? It's not about... Tony Benn, I used to walk past Tony Benn's house in Holland Park and dream of the day that I could live in a house like that. I'm still dreaming of it. It's a beautiful house in one of my favourite streets in London. Robbie Williams and Jimmy Page live just over the road. It's a glory. But no one doubts Tony Benn's commitment to the less privileged. No one doubts. You can have conservative politicians who truly believe, I might be ideologically different from them, but they truly believe that the way to bring up everybody is to sort of bring up the entrepreneurial class or the owning class, and then everybody else comes with them. They truly believe that, and they understand the insidiousness of food banks. And then you've got Rishi Sunak, who thinks that not having Sky TV as a child, and remember, he had 4 or 5 goes at coming up with something. Not having Sky TV as a child is evidence that he can somehow understand what it's like to be poor. I mean, that is tragic and comical at the same time. It's hilarious. I mean, what would you say to people who doubt that you can understand what it's like to be poor? Well, I'd say that I didn't have Sky TV as a child. So, what are we talking about here? 0345 60 973 is the number you need. This is quite a specific question, and I'm asking quite a lot of you today, but it's only Wednesday. You're not allowed to be tired yet. What are we talking about here? It's not the fact that he's richer than the king, right? You could be richer than the king and still be committed to improving the lives of the dispossessed, improving the lives of the poor, okay? It's not the fact that he's richer than the king. It's not that simple fact. It's more complicated than that. What is wrong with him? That when asked for evidence that he knows what it's like to struggle, he comes up with not having Sky TV. And I ask this question, I say this again, I won't labour the point, but as someone who I think comes from a similar background, but who does not struggle in any way whatsoever to recognise A, his own privilege, and B, the misery that is experienced and endured by millions of people in the country that his party has governed for the last 14 years. The heat banks. Do you remember the first time we heard about warm banks? Places you could go just to warm yourself up because you couldn't afford to turn the heating on. The calls we've taken from people who sit in front of the telly in the only room in the house that they heat and they wrap themselves in duvets because they can only turn the radiator on for a couple of days. The mortgage misery that Liz Truss inflicted on the how? What is it that's maybe you know people like this, not just politicians. But what is it that's wrong with him? What is the Sky TV problem? What does it prove? What is it the emblem of? All right? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 10:22.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Here's a brilliant example of what I'm talking about. Emma says it's the idea. It's never occurred to him that you can work your fingers to the bone and still not succeed financially. That's the other thing that came across in that clip. My parents taught me hard work. What is he disconnected from? in a way, is the question that I'm asking. Because it is not simply privilege and wealth that turns you into somebody who thinks that working hard is a guarantee of financial security or comfort, or that not having Sky TV is an evidence of knowing what it's like to go without. So what is wrong with him? Rick's in Kiverton to kick things off. Rick, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you again.
Likewise.
So, as I was just saying to your producer then, I was surprised I'm on this quickly. It sounds
do you want
like
to take
Rishi...
a moment? Do you want to have a sit down, have a cup of tea, have a moment to marshal your thoughts? That's what happens on that. If you ring in between 10:20 and, well, especially when the introduction's that long, then there's every chance that you're going to be talking to me before you've had time to draw breath. So don't blow it. Don't blow it, Rick.
No pressure now. Yeah. I was saying to your producer that I think it's just he has a lack of understanding about what it is to struggle, to be on the breadline. With him saying that, his parents sacrificed and stuff like that, I don't think he understood or appreciated what they went through.
How can you end up Prime Minister without knowing what it's like, for example, to run out of money before you've run out of month?
Well, I've got a simple answer to that. Boris Johnson, David Cameron. Do they ever run out of money before they run out of month?
You don't have to have done it in order to imagine what it feels like. I think that possibly David, don't shoot me down, Rick, but I think possibly David Cameron could just about imagine that. Johnson couldn't imagine being anybody else, but that's narcissism rather than political disconnection. Sunak, the way he speaks, and that line Emma picked up on, talking as if it hasn't ever crossed his mind that you could work your fingers to the bone and not be, quotes, successful, end quotes, or even comfortable. How does that happen? Does that happen to you, or is it intrinsic? Is it inherent, or is it imposed from the out? I just don't know. I don't get it.
I think it can be a mixture of things from environment. I mean, if you listen to that thing he said in sixth form, that he's got working class friends. Oh, wait, no, not working class.
Yes.
There's that disconnect of he's seen people with money. As in the interview, he's richer than the king. Or his family.
But he wasn't as a kid. He wasn't as a kid.
I think he's lost sight. He's now in that space of he has more money than anyone can imagine. And he's in a position of power. It's
funny, isn't it? Because some people like that would be very, very, very connected to their roots, very mindful of the struggles that their parents had faced, and maybe there's an arrogance there. That maybe it's that born 3-0 up and think you've scored a hat trick. He wasn't born 3-0 up. David Cameron was born 3-0 up. Rishi Sunak, let's say, was born 1-0 up or 2-0 up, and thinks that he's scored goals. That idea, I come across this a lot in life, not just at work, but the idea that it's not luck. It's not luck. It's preordained. It's rich man in his castle, poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. It's not dumb luck. If it's dumb luck, then I'm not special. If it's dumb luck, I'm not an amazing person. If it has to be deserved, which means that the people who've got nothing deserve nothing. That's a brutal thing to say, but that's where I'm being led. Sam's in Cardiff. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello, Sam.
2 points. The first one, I'm not sure that you're being entirely fair on Rishi, and I cannot believe that those words are coming out of my mouth.
I thought I was being quite kind. But go on.
Because I don't know if for you personally, but for me, there was something as a child. I was, had a good childhood, and my parents were, comfortable. And there was one toy that I didn't get.
Let me guess what it was.
Unless the producers have told you,
no,
probably
they haven't. How old are you?
36.
Oh, you need to be at least 10 years older for me to be able to guess what it was. Because if you're my age, it would be Big Track, Tin Can Alley. What was it? Go on.
I think it was a Fisher-Price car that was bright yellow and red with these wheels that went in all directions.
Oh, how endearing. How sweet. It wasn't even technological. So what you're saying is that you do have a mini motorbike for me. I once told my late father that I was the only kid in the class who didn't have a mini motorbike, and I couldn't understand at the time why he laughed so uproariously. He's like, well, honestly, son, the only kid in the class who doesn't have a mini motorbike. I go, yeah, Dad, everybody's got one. I'm the only. They all laugh at me. But I'm 52 now. I wouldn't claim that was evidence of me going without as a child, Sam.
No, but if all of his friends in school, who I appreciate some of them were probably a lot more affluent than him, had Sky TV, and he didn't. He might have been bullied for it. It might have been something that was actually very personal to him.
Yes.
I'm not saying that it's actually, the reality of things, but it's very personal to him. So I think it's a little bit unfair just to dismiss it as ridiculous.
No, I'm going to disagree with you because I think I've made that point quite well. I mean, you talk about the things that you were conscious of not having as a child that your peer group did have. James Newton points out that when I was growing up, he writes, having Sky TV was a sign that you were working class. Sun columnists and lazy phone-in hosts would say that all the unemployed people couldn't possibly be struggling financially because they all had flat-screen TVs and a Sky dish outside. So there was a terrible period until they actually bought up the cricket, where there was snobbery attached to having Sky TV. So I don't think you would be bullied at Winchester for not having Sky TV. He loved football, presumably, and therefore maybe he wanted it. So it's like your Fisher-Price car. It's like my mini motorbike. It's like Big Track for many people of my generation, which was like a programmable remote control vehicle. You do still feel that sense of, God, I really wish I'd had that as a kid. But you don't hold it up as evidence of knowing what it's like to go without, Sam. To be hungry, to be cold.
No, but if he sees going without not in the sensitive way that a Prime Minister should.
Well, there you go. So now you're answering the question of what's wrong with him.
Well, that is yes, absolutely. But with him sort of saying that, absolutely insensitive. He has no sort of political game at all and frequently says the wrong things. But I'm not sure that his Sky TV comment is anywhere near the worst things that he said.
No, I'm not necessarily going to argue with you about that. But we can't talk about D-Day every single day of the week, Sam. Tempting though, perhaps it might be. Thank you. And something I've overlooked. I'm 52 years old. Big D's been in touch to remind me of the defining toy of our generation that I completely failed to mention in my little nostalgic roundup of the things I never had. I had Tin Can Alley. I won the premium bonds when I was about 11 and I bought Tin Can Alley from Woolworths. So what's the toy? What's the toy for my generation that would be the absolute holy grail of desire, particularly for boys, I think. I'll tell you after the very latest headlines at 10:32 with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Funny, isn't it? You only remember the things you didn't have. You don't remember the things you did have in anything like the same way, on anything like the same level. So I thought it was a no-brainer what the toy was that everybody my age wanted. But I had a Scale Electric. And the Scale Electric actually has come second, just in a completely unscientific glance at my churning inbox. If you didn't have a Scale Electric, I feel for you. But the one I was thinking of, and the one that Big D suggested, was the Millennium Falcon. It was an extraordinary piece of kit. So, Rishi Sunak, how can you relate to people using food banks or choosing between eating and heating? Well, I didn't have a Millennium Falcon as a kid. And that is the equivalent of what he said. Do you know what it's like to go without? Yeah, I do. We didn't have Sky TV. So how can you end up there? What is wrong with him? 0345 6060 Rob's in Durham. Rob, what would you like to say?
I think if Winchester College had a course of emotional intelligence,
yes,
they'd be in special measures.
Or at least there'd be an awful lot of parents entitled to a refund.
Yeah. It's in some ways it's like, you remember the Monty Python sketch, The Four Yorkshiremen?
I do. I even alluded to it on Twitter already this morning. He thinks it was a documentary.
Yeah, it's like there were 16 of us in a classroom at Winchester School.
Yeah.
It's just mental.
I mean, I think, and I don't like labouring this too much, but I think it's always important to be completely open about your own relationship with privilege and advantage. I think because my background is quite similar to his, economically at least, if not in many other ways. No one else from my family could have dreamt of going to public school before I came along, but my generation. Then the fact that I find it utterly baffling, I think, is quite relevant, because if you were watching this as someone who had grown up either in poverty or genuinely going without what others might consider to be essentials, it would be easy to understand how mad this intervention is, how offensive it is. But people from a similar background can find it shocking as well, which, as you say, speaks to something deeper than mere experience. It speaks to a lack of capacity for emotional intelligence, because there'll be plenty of people that were at Winchester with him who will have their head in their hands this morning going, what are you talking about, man?
But I think if he'd simply said, he'd have to ask my parents. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was in a lovely family, and I'm sure they must have made sacrifices, but I didn't see it.
Yeah,
but
I suppose Sam in Cardiff's point about you remember the things you haven't got, and he genuinely remembers not having Sky TV. I hear you, but it is. I'm trying to explain it in an almost academic way, in a scientific. How could you lack this, and how can you end up being Prime Minister when you think that not having Sky as a kid is suffering or going without? Pedants, I am aware. I didn't correct Rob on it because we had more important things to discuss, but it was not actually a Monty Python sketch, although I think they have latterly incorporated it into their stage show, but it was a sketch featuring, I can't remember if it was all four of them were members of Monty Python later, but when they did the Four Yorkshiremen sketch, it was before Monty Python had actually convened. Neil's in Garrow Valley in South Wales. Neil, what do you think's going on here?
Good morning, Nick.
Hello.
I think it's just a simple case of he's not sharp. The example I gave to your producer was somebody like Mick Lynch. Whatever question you throw at him, whatever curveball, he's got an answer. If he doesn't know, he'll say, I don't know. But you throw a question at most politicians of whatever party, and if they don't know, they flounder, and then you know as a interviewer,
yeah.
I've got him here. I've got him. And he doesn't have an answer. He'll rehearse his answers. But if you give him a curveball question, it's like if they're not sharp enough to think on their feet and either give an honest answer.
What would you have said if you were him?
If
you were him, what would you have? Because I don't think. I mean, I think you're almost being generous by chalking this up as a typical trait of politicians. Because for me, any half decent politician would have been able to answer this without inserting both feet into his mouth. What would you have said?
I would have simply said, I've been so lucky in my life.
Yeah.
I haven't had to go without. And it just said that and say, but since I've become Prime Minister, I've listened to people who didn't have what I've had, and I want to make their lives better. Simple.
I mean, there you go. I mean, who wouldn't have said that?
But how many of them would say something like that?
I think they all were. Cameron would have been. I mean, there's no earthly way Cameron would have claimed that not having Sky TV was somehow giving him an insight into what it's like to go without. You have to own your privilege.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Public
but
life.
Can you think of anybody in his cabinet who would have been quick enough and honest enough to say something like that? We are such at a place with this government where he is the best of the worst, and you can't think of anybody who thought, if he was there, he would have given that answer.
So we're looking at the shallowness of the talent puddle paradigm now, Neil. The talent puddle from which he picks and from which, in a sense, he was picked is now so shallow that we can't be surprised at the awfulness of their performances.
Exactly, and remember, his advisors have got to be less sharp than him, otherwise they're going to show him up. And he hasn't got the courage or the ability to put somebody as an advisor who is really good and sharp, who will keep on saying to him, hang on, Prime Minister, I don't think you should do that, because he's not that kind of leader who's big enough to say, yeah, that's the right thing to do, you're right there.
What did he say to the fella at the homeless shelter? Do you remember that one? Did he say, are you in business? Are you in business?
Oh, that's it, yeah. Yeah,
I'll get that clip ready as well.
Run?
Yeah. And really, it's not like we should be surprised about these developments. It's just that they seem to be crystallising because we're in an electoral campaign, but the evidence has been there all along.
Yeah. And we've got a guy running the country who from some point of view, is incredibly intelligent, and yet from other things, he cannot even simply speak to people without putting his foot in it.
It is, yeah, and that equips you in post-Brexit Britain. That equips you to rise to the very, very top of the political tree, because all of the stuff that used to matter suddenly didn't, and all of the stuff that used to hold you back, whether it was moral corruption, epic incompetence in the cases of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, or simply an appalling grasp of political realities in Rishi Sunak's case, for now. It doesn't hold you back anymore. It doesn't prevent you from rising to the very, very top of the political ladder. I love that. I love that phrase. I've been very lucky. I've been very lucky in my life. Have you gone without? I do encounter this, you know. You hear it a lot during the private education conversation that has become quite popular during this election campaign because of Labour's pledge to remove VAT exemptions from school fees. You do hear people who have great privilege casting themselves as sons and daughters of struggle. And the most amazing thing about that particular debate is the way in which people who deny that poverty exists in other contexts, people in this profession, who would, for example, when discussing hygiene poverty or food banks, who would claim, in fact, not long ago, they'd have claimed that they can't really be poor, all these people going to food banks, because they've got Sky TV, just to knit together the two topics. But they deny the existence of poverty in a country that has, I think, more food banks than it does branches of McDonald's. And yet, when the Labour Party suggests removing the VAT exemption from school fees, suddenly they become great crusaders for the discriminated against parents of privately educated children, the last bastion of deprivation. A tiny number of parents who might not be able to afford the school fees anymore if they go up by 20%. It's extraordinary that poverty denial can sit alongside privilege fetishization with a side order of I'm not privileged at all. My parents worked bloody hard to send me to public. I used to say things like that. My parents worked bloody hard to send me to public school. Of course you're privileged. Two things can be true at the same time. And guess what? There's some people on the other side of town whose parents work even harder than yours, and they're struggling to fill the fridge at the end of the month because they get paid a pittance for the work that they do. And Sunak doesn't seem to think that exists. That's the real problem here. He doesn't seem to think that exists. That you can work really, really, really hard and not rise through society. And of course, traditional conservatism depends upon people not only not rising through society, but also knowing their place, doffing their caps and tugging their forelocks, because a rich man in his castle, a poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. It's just only occasionally does the light reach the place where it reveals that these people love that status quo because they benefit from it. And I guess those of us who have risen further on the socio-economic ladder than our parents can go in one of two directions. We can either go down the path of saying that is proof of luck and serendipity, privilege and circumstance, or you can sign up to the idea that you've ended up richer than the king because you're actually a genius or because you're actually a superior sort of human being. And I would take a lot of convincing now that Rishi Sunak doesn't at least subconsciously sign up to the idea that he is a superior sort of human being. Great tragedy of right-wing politics, the great tragedy of British politics over the last 100 years is that lots of people on the wrong end of this utterly unfair distribution of wealth also end up thinking that people like Rishi Sunak or Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage are superior sorts of human beings, better than them. I don't know where that comes from, whether it's a parenting fail or a history problem, but thinking that these politicians, particularly this generation of complete no-hopers, no marks, are better than you, better than your children, breaks my heart, genuinely breaks my heart. The original 4 Yorkshiremen, 2 Monty Python members, 2 non-Monty Python members. I'll tell you who they were after this, but a special prize if you can get in there first.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Just have a quick listen to this, then we'll talk to Jonty in St John's Wood, because I think psychologically this is increasingly fascinating. The question of how you can end up in a place where you would offer up not having Sky TV as a child of evidence that you have empathy for people who go without. I think this speaks to the same psychological problem.
Morning. I'm all right, how are you? Yeah, that's right. I'm Rishi. What's your name?
This is a homeless shelter.
Hungry? Well, we're getting some good breakfast. Thank you. Now, would you like sausages? Some toast? Perfect. A couple of eggs? Fantastic. Now, you've been here before, have you? I have, yeah. Yeah, it's a great place, isn't it? Yeah, it's a superb job. Right, that's that. That's some cutlery. Let me get. What are you cutting me out? Well, that is exactly what I'm trying to do. Exactly what I'm trying to do. There's the business.
What do you have? Do you work in a business? Do you want some fruit?
I'm homeless. I'm actually a homeless person at the minute, but I'm interested in business.
Yeah, what kind of business?
Like finance is good for the city, and when finance and stuff's doing well, we'll do well in London. So
yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So I used to work in finance, actually.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Investment bank.
Yeah, well, I did lots of different things, but you're right. Because I think the good thing now is it's not just London. If you look at all the jobs in finance around the UK, the majority of them are outside of London now.
Yeah.
So it's spread across the UK.
The law and the associated.
Yeah. Is that something you'd like to get into?
I wouldn't mind. But I don't know. I'd like to get through Christmas first.
Yeah. What's the plan? What are you doing this weekend?
No idea. I'm hoping that the St Mungo's can help me get into some temporary accommodation, so I'm not...
And that is remarkable. And this isn't... I mean, I started off being very critical of Sunak. And I still am. God, don't think that I'm stepping back from that, because he sought to become Prime Minister. If he'd stayed at Goldman Sachs, then this level of disconnection from reality would be more forgivable, perhaps. But you're talking to a homeless person, and you ask them if they're in business, then you ask them if they're thinking, and he said to you, I'm homeless. I'm homeless. I might not know where I'm going to sleep tonight. Oh, are you keen to get into finance? Are you? And then he says, I just want to get through Christmas, to be honest with you. And there's something Tiggerish there. This was before he had the stuffing knocked out of him, which was on display in Silverstone yesterday. There's something Tiggerish there. It doesn't land quite, does it? As if the wheels are turning but the cogs aren't biting. I'm homeless. Oh, great. Anyway, what are you doing this weekend? Finance. No, you'd want to swear, wouldn't you? I'm chuffing homeless, mate. Stop talking to me about banking. I'm homeless. It's incredible. Anyway, at least he knows what it's like to go without. Because he didn't have Sky TV as a child. I mean, really, there's a book to be written, not by me, I don't think. I've got, but there's a book to be written about how somebody so I wrote a chapter about it. How could he end up Prime? Anyway, Jonty's in St John's Wood. Jonty, what do you reckon?
Hi, Jane. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Right. Well, so while I was waiting to come online, I did a bit of research to add to your Sky comment. Listener with content, as Nick would say. And I realized in 1996, when he was 16, there were only 3.6 million subscribers to Sky anyhow.
Yeah, so it wasn't huge.
Actually, you would have been in an elite if you had Sky, so it was wrong from every angle.
So you think he's even reached for something that wasn't... I mean, he might, if he loved football. They started... Monday Night Football, I think, started when he was about 11 or 12. So you might have felt... Exactly. You might have felt that... But it was A, you're right, hardly anyone had it, and B, there was a lot of snobbery attached to it as well at the time.
Yeah. Anyway, coming on to my main point, I think clearly, structurally, like in his nature, we're all born with a nature. It's nature or nurture. He's clearly structured in not a gifted person when it comes to empathy. But if you look at his track record, what he's done, he didn't just go to Winchester. He went to a prep school, then he went to Winchester, and then he didn't just go into the private sector. He joined the Conservative Party immediately while he was at university, and he also was in high finance immediately. And my bet is that however, you have your left brain and your right brain, and your left brain is all the logical stuff, and your right brain is your empathy side.
Yes.
Well, the left brain has been accentuated to such a degree that that his nature has been, if you like, solidified or ossified to such an extent that he's become politically inept. And I think then you add on to the fact that he came up. I think he was only voted in 2015 or 16.
Yes.
So he came through the ranks of the Conservative Party when it was all rubbish and detritus at the end of in the middle end of the Conservative regime. And then add on one other thing. You remember that Theresa May speech, which didn't go down very well, about, what was it, people without a nation, without a root?
Yes.
Do you remember that speech? I can't remember exactly what the name of it was.
It'll come to me. You keep talking.
Well, so here, it's not that he's just from a particular class. He's from a sector within a class that is highly internationalist and isn't really rooted in the community of this nation. And I think that's what Farage was getting at. I don't think Farage was getting at his race.
Oh,
I
he
think
was.
He was getting at
we can agree to disagree about this, but why would Richard Tice not be in the same category of people who I mean, arguably even more disassociated from reality because he inherited most of his fortune. He didn't even have to work for it.
That's a bit of a red herring, but I think
I can't allow red herrings to go unsniffed, Jonty. But that I like the right brain, left brain stuff, and that's, in a way that is why the privileged classes historically, some have sought to expose their children to other experiences. Citizens of nowhere was the phrase you were looking for. Citizens of the world or citizens of nowhere.
What he's going to do, by the way, James, probably after he's kicked out and
go back to California,
he's going to raise a major fund with connections in California, UK, Israel, and India in high tech, and he'll make billions.
He'll make another killing, and I don't think between you and me, John T, I don't think he can wait. Do you?
I think he's racing out that door.
I think he's like a rat up a drain pipe. He can't wait. Goodness knows what conversations that he has with his wife now about how utterly awful this is, and what were we thinking, and why did we do it, and how soon could make it stop. Please make it stop. Imagine that oddly, for someone who's richer than the king, your whole life can still be an anxiety dream. When I was growing up, I was always baffled by the sons of aristocracy who threw their lives away, or who were addicted to drugs, or who put entire family fortunes up their nose, because you'd always think, if you were young and you didn't grow up with a lot of money, I mean a lot of money, you'd always think, well, if I had a lot of money, everything would be fine. But of course it isn't. Super rich people, I think Christina Onassis, when I was growing up, was a wonderful example of this. But the level of disconnect that you need to say to a homeless person, are you in business? What are you doing this weekend? That means you've never stopped. I like Jonty's analysis, up until the complete misreading of Nigel Farage's racist dog whistles. But I like that analysis because it explains without excusing. And then the question becomes, how on earth, or why on earth, would somebody like that want to be Prime Minister? Who did he want to be Prime Minister of? You can't conceive of financial difficulty. You can't conceive of struggle. You think that not having Sky TV equates with going without. You think that homeless people are simultaneously working in business and thinking of going into high finance. Why would you want... Say to him, why do you want... You know what David Cameron said when they asked him why he wanted to be Prime Minister? Do you know what he said? He said, I think I'd be rather good at it. So, I mean, that's disconnected. But, I mean, Rishi Sunak makes David Cameron look like, I don't know, Pudsey, the Children in Need bear. It makes him look like a model of empathy. And that level, crikey. I don't know, we have actually got a little bit closer to understanding how on earth a human being can end up like that. But how on earth that human being who has ended up like that can end up Prime Minister is a question for the ages. Just to break the habit of a lifetime and give you the answer to a hook and tease in good time, it was John Cleese, Graham Chapman, Marty Feldman and Tim Brooke-Taylor. Okay, I'll give you another one now, just as we head towards the news headlines. This is true, and yet the first time you hear it, you think it's made up. Cleese was not John Cleese's original surname. He changed it for showbiz purposes. Do you know what his original surname was? I bet you 50p that when I tell you after this, you don't believe me.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11. I'll just read you this as a little nod towards the conversation we had in the last hour, because this is a man who ended up Prime Minister as well, writing in The Guardian today. It's Gordon Brown. In Leeds, a child fails to turn up at school because she and her mother are sharing her family's one and only pair of shoes. In Liverpool, one of two brothers turns up for football training each week because they are sharing the one pair of football boots the family can afford. In Swansea, a girl is bullied at school by her classmates because she has no trainers at all. In Wigan, a teenage schoolgirl is found walking alone on a Saturday wearing her school uniform and explains that these are the only clothes she has. Gordon Brown relaying experiences of hardship that he came across while travelling around Britain and describing them as the tip of an iceberg of widespread destitution and national shame. That food banks are needed is a national scandal. But at least we can all agree that none of those children had to suffer the horrors of not having Sky TV at home in the way that Rishi Sunak did when he was a kid. An extraordinary moment in politics. That it speaks to something much deeper than we've managed to convey. Well, we didn't try to convey what it speaks to at depth, but somehow comparing two men who could become Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, admittedly one before Brexit broke all of the normal requirements of observing reality and telling the truth and relying on evidence, but still, in the same decade almost, these two men could become Prime Minister. And one of them speaks of poverty from a position of experience and fury. Experience, compassion and fury. And one of them doesn't really know that it exists at all. Thinks that if you're homeless, you might just be biding your time before launching a career in a merchant bank. Extraordinary, that. I've got a horrible feeling I can feel a book taking shape in my mind, but I've sworn to myself I'm never going to write another one. Speaking of books, today, and I want to say thank you for this. I know it sounds like a plug, but today my latest effort, How They Broke Britain, has been in the Amazon Top 20 for half a year. And I never get the chance to say thank you individually to everybody that's bought it. I'd be doing that for the rest of my life. But I can't tell you how much pleasure that's brought me, how much pride. And all of it, down to people who've been kind enough not just to buy it, but also to recommend it to other people. But half a year in the top 20 is a magical moment for me. Thank you. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. Of all the policies that Rishi Sunak has already announced, which is the one he's most likely to have U-turned on in the last 10 minutes? Should we take calls on that? Should we do a quick... Because people, you're not... No, it won't work as a... Will it work as a... I mean, this is turning on a sixpence stuff. It's not the topic that I was planning on talking about. No, I'll take texts. All right? I'll take text because everyone can look it up. You're not allowed to look it up. But of all... I know I'll tell you either shortly before or shortly after the 11:15 hiatus. I'm going to start calling that... Because Keith doesn't like me calling it a break. Shall I call it an inhalation? I'm going to call it the 11:15 inhalation. It's when we all get our breath back for a moment. So either shortly before or shortly after the 11:15 inhalation, I will tell you which of Rishi Sunak's pronouncements so far it would appear that they have already rode back on. Actually, I think it's been out there for a couple of hours, so it's probably not quite the subject of tension that I am describing. But yeah, you'll all get free Sky TV for everyone. No, that's not a policy. And then in capital letters from Vinny, John Cleese, James. Yeah, you're quite right. I should answer that one first before I start setting up another one. John Cleese was born John Cheese. Right, don't look at me like that. It's true. And it always amazes me that surprises. In a room, there's always a couple of people that will go, oh yeah, I knew that. But then most people in the room will go, don't be ridiculous. No, he wasn't. But he was actually born John Cheese. And make of that what you will. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. John Curtis, you will be familiar with his work. I think it's now the law that you have to describe him as the doyen of psephologists or political analysts. He has conducted some survey. He's conducted some research and found that trust and confidence in politicians is at an all-time low. Interestingly, there are distinctions in some of this research between government in particular and politicians in general. But it essentially shows that people's trust in governments and politicians and confidence in their systems of government is as low now as it has ever been over the last 50 years, if not lower. And I want to know why. Not necessarily from the research, which I've got in front of me, but the lived experience of people listening to this programme. I tell you, some of the interesting stuff that comes out here is the number of people who supported Brexit, the number of Leave voters who have arrived at a place in the last 5 years where they, or certainly the last 3 years, where they have seen their faith in politics completely collapse. People, I mean, I don't know how much the I don't know how much the compassion for the contempt for the conmen argument holds now. I've thought for some time that it was running out of road, because if you're still clinging to the idea that Brexit was a good idea, you're probably beyond help. But the the figures are striking. 71% believe the economy is worse off as a result of leaving the EU. It was only at 51% in 2019, and only 24% of respondents said that they thought Britain should be outside the EU. So Brexit's dead. Now, it's extraordinary that both main parties continue to almost completely ignore it, but it is responsible for so much of the problems that we have. How responsible is it for your personal disillusionment with politics? Because in some ways, if you fell for the lies of the Brexit politicians, it shouldn't have turned you off politicians. It should have turned you towards the ones that told you the truth. So the problem now is that the ones that told you the truth about Brexit are frightened of talking about it for reasons that are possibly complicated, but also fairly clear. They're frightened of getting monstered by the Brexit-supporting right-wing media. Even as the public has completely moved away from supporting it, the realisation that it was a disastrous thing to do has settled on the shoulders of many people that voted for it. But because nobody is standing up and saying, that's all right, lads, come over here. We told you all along it was going to be awful. They're on. Davey, the Liberal Democrats are doing that, and they enjoyed it. A remarkable poll boost yesterday in one poll. And remember, one poll does not a population make. But the idea that this is a big driver, Brexit, the failure of Brexit, is a big driver of people's disillusionment with politics. In fact, the more I talk myself into it, the more I think this might be the only element of the survey that we look at, given that this is the James O. Brexit show. It's extraordinary to think that the failure of Brexit has driven people to a position of disillusionment with politicians in general, when in fact, most politicians in both parties told them that Brexit was going to be a really bad idea. That's actually really interesting, isn't it? That's the media, right? I mean, how can you be in a country where the population becomes the first in human history to vote to impose economic sanctions on itself, and it fails, obviously. The penny finally drops, the euro drops all around the country, that this was a stupid thing to do. But the price we pay for that is a decline in the respect that we have for all politicians, including the ones that told the truth about it. I find that fascinating, but on reflection, perhaps not quite fascinating enough to cloud out the bigger question, which is why? Why has your trust and confidence in government and politicians reached a record low? Some of your answers might be obvious. Okay, 0345 6060 973. Some of your answers may be very, very personal. And some of your answers may be completely surprising to me. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I think this is a little unfair on opposition politicians, don't you? Certainly the current generation of opposition politicians. 14 years of Tory rule, disillusionment with government and politics is at an all-time low, but only one party has had its hand on the steering wheel or its hand on the tiller or been in any position at all to make any meaningful difference to the country. Brexit's been a disaster, so blame the politicians that told you it would be brilliant. Why would you become disillusioned with everybody? And then Boris Johnson's regime, Partygate, that's going to be a big part of it. But how it's actually turned your dial is what intrigues me the most. You know, the phrase that I find most depressing in modern political discourse is the phrase that they're all the same. All politicians are the same, because that, of course, creates space for the politicians that aren't the same, the ones that are fascists or race baiters or blatant liars, like a Trump. But the notion of confidence in politicians being at an all-time low is a democratic crisis. So what was it for you? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What was it for you? Either very, very specifically or more broadly, the experience or experiences of the last 5 years, let's take it back to the last election, that have seen your confidence in government and politicians plummet. What has nudged your needle? What has turned your dial? For me, I think I'm too close to the action on this. I don't. My faith in politicians hasn't fallen. It's higher now than it was in 2019. Because in 2019, you had the choice between the unelectable and the unconscionable. It was an appalling choice in 2019. A man who was visibly morally corrupt and a man who was obviously ill-equipped for high office of any kind. And so now, at least, you've got a choice between someone who is obviously ill-equipped for high office and someone who isn't, I would say, personally. So things are a little better now. You've got politicians who, at least, when Keir Starmer yesterday described Rishi Sunak's manifesto as looking like a Jeremy Corbyn manifesto, you get an indication. I thought it was an interesting intervention, but you get an indication of just how completely he's turned that oil tanker around, for good or for ill. You may not have liked the nod back to the last fella, and of course it puts him in the embarrassing position of being reminded of all the times that he bigged up that manifesto and campaigned on it on 2 occasions. But the disillusionment in politicians is at an all-time low, and I want you to tell me why you think that is, either as a nation issue or as a personal one. And a quick correction: Cheese was the Cleese family name, but it had already been changed by the time he was born. So I think his dad was a Cheese, certainly his granddad was a Cheese, but he was always a Cleese.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:17, and it is cause for concern. Depending on how this goes, we may move on to the question, if there's time, of how easy it will be to fix. And we will talk to the doyen of psephologists, I think, John Curtis, before the end of this hour. But confidence in politicians is the lowest it has ever been. 2 questions: why, and how do we fix it? Do you know why I often mention Amber Rudd at this point in my contemplations? Do you know why? I see Amber Rudd, oddly, as an emblem of hope in the context of collapse in confidence in politicians. And you may know why already. If you don't, I'll tell you. Hopefully I'll tell you before the end of play today. Let's start in Stockport with Rob. Rob, what's going on?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
To me, a lot of the lack of confidence
to me,
yeah, it goes to Brexit.
Yes.
Those who sold us Brexit were lying. We knew they're lying, but at least they're still lying. To me, my lack of confidence comes from those who were correct, who told us Brexit would be the unmitigated disaster it is, but rather than still telling us it, are now embracing it. And it's just so disappointing that I see potentially our next Prime Minister, who was utterly against Brexit, now going, we need to look at the opportunities for it. Well, it just feels like positions of convenience. Have the courage of your convictions, especially when you were right.
I'm so glad you got on first, because I hadn't seen it. I'm suffering from my own form of footballification. I hadn't thought of it as being that way round. I'd have thought that for all the people that voted for it, they could now rush into the arms of all the people that would tell them it was rubbish, but they've all got their arms folded, and they're all going, no, we've got to make the most of it. And that actually is a reason why you'd sort of think a pox on all their houses.
Yeah, I look at people who now are effectively going to be running the country, and they're embracing something that they were telling us 8 years ago was going to be an utter disaster.
I don't think they're not embracing it, are they? I mean, we can get into the weeds a bit here. No, come on, don't make those noises with me, Rob. They're not embracing it, are they? They're kind of not talking about it, really, or they're making it clear that they're not going to reverse it, because the calculation is that the political damage that would be done by even the accusation that you're going to reverse it, which Boris Johnson was making this weekend anyway, that would be too damaging.
But when I heard the term "we're going to," I think they did use the opportunities provided by Brexit. I'd rather they said we're going to make the best of the situation.
We're going to start papering over the cracks. We're going to start trying to undo some of the damage. I mean, I've wanted every Prime Minister since Theresa May to say that, but you would expect if Starmer becomes Prime Minister that he might become the first one that actually does.
It depends, because if
he has to, mate.
If finding the opportunities is in the manifesto, they have to go with that, or else it's another U-turn.
Yeah, but the opportunities... Now, come on, this is politics. You could claim... Well, I was talking about the opportunities for U-turning.
Well, I'm hoping politicians will be honest, James.
While you're here, I should sort this one out before I forget. Of all the things that have been announced by Rishi Sunak since he called the election a few weeks ago, what do you think they have apparently U-turned on this morning?
I actually have been in work this morning and haven't heard what
good. That's perfect then.
National Service.
Yes! Give the man a cigar. They've already said. Apparently, Grant Shapps said this morning that it will only be for 25 days, as opposed to.
My 12-year-old twins will be delighted that they won't be forced to go into the army
for a whole year. They've still got to do 25 days, but I don't think you need to buy a uniform for that, Rob. It's 21 minutes after 11. I think that's really interesting, and that's why I love my job. I'd missed that. I am James O-Brexit. Nobody was clearer about what was going to happen than me, but I don't have what Rob just described, probably because of my own footballification. I don't have anger yet or disillusionment yet with the politicians who were on my side of the argument, particularly after the referendum, but who now, for what they would describe as reasons of political pragmatism, have to stay quiet or say nothing or even pretend that there are opportunities to be exploited from the thing that they knew would be awful and has now been shown to be awful. So, apart from the Liberal Democrats, where do you go? And that, of course, is why neither the Tories nor the Labour Party want Brexit to be a big factor in this election, in this campaign. And, of course, it makes even more of a mystery of how the chief snake oil salesman, Nigel Farage, could sort of cast himself as a returning hero when the biggest achievement of his life has turned out to be an absolute pile of cobblers. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Adam is in Rutland. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you very much for taking the call. Fantastic to speak to you. So you're
very welcome. Thank you.
Your work and everything has brought me over from from a sort of right-wing way to a more central-left view and liberal view of things. So, yeah, brilliant books and everything. So really pleased.
That means a lot.
I think my take is actually a non-Brexit view on this.
Good.
In that I think over the years, our ability to be able to research things, to use, things like X, Twitter, Facebook, talk with international people across the board and different people, has allowed us, from a sort of younger generation, to be able to fact check a lot more what politicians say.
Okay.
And I think that's both on the right and the left wing side of things. And I think in the older generations, in previous generations, they've taken what politicians have said at face value. Whereas I think young people now are more cynical of that because they can cynical because they can independently fact check what politicians are saying. So whether that's in regards to tax rises, when documents are published, people can go online and see, they've lied about that. Whether that's Labour, Conservative.
This is really this is two absolute doozies to open up the conversation because you're actually convincing me. But at the same time, the social media and the technology you describe is responsible for millions of people believing things that are demonstrably untrue, that are categorically and spectacularly false. So you're describing the same era in which fake news has become a thing as the same technology somehow providing the opposite, I guess fact check is the opposite of fake news. And yet they've both flourished in the same space, haven't they, in a way?
They have both flourished, and I think that gives technology to be both a blessing and a curse within that.
Well, it's how you use it. Technology is always about how you use it, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think more technical-minded people, and that goes across the age range.
Yeah.
More technical-minded people are more into maybe just take that extra step further than just looking at the headline or the tweet that a particular pundit's put out, but to look at the content of what they've shared or to independently look at that. And I think I see a lot of sort of my age range, so sort of, early 30s, sort of looking more into other areas of information. Whereas I would say the older generation, so I'm talking sort of my grandparents, would take the likes of, any politician, whether left or right.
But I think they were telling the truth. I think they largely were telling the truth, or at least they believed what they were saying. What you had with Johnson and on the other side of the Atlantic with Trump and to an extent with Farage is politicians who are not really related to reality or not really related to the truth. And yet it's the people that like them that are most active often, it seems, on social media. But so it gives, you're talking about a new dimension, aren't you, in which you no longer have to take anything on trust. And that could lead you in both directions. That could lead you to a position of violent cynicism where fake news can flourish, or it can lead you to a position of fact-checking where you have that new gear of scepticism, because here's some proof that they're fibbing. So the tax stuff in the last couple of weeks, you've got, they're claiming that taxes are coming down. I think it was Krishnan Gurumurthy on Channel 4 News with one of the Tories pointing out that national insurance might be coming down, but taxes are going up. They say, that's like it's up and down. That's like black and white and yes and no. You're saying it's coming down when it's actually going up. So that would disillusion people who bothered to do their own research and found out that, or even who look at their tax returns, Adam. You don't even need to fact check. Looking at your tax returns and what's going out is going up, and that the government is telling you it's coming down.
I would say they've become a victim, though, of the fact that we can fact check a lot more now. Whereas previously they could spout these things and say these things with no one checking it, because you'd get a lot of nodding heads going, oh, I've always voted this way, they must be right, they must be true. Whereas now they've become victims of the wealth of information that's available out there to say, oh, actually, they're starting to think, oh, we're going to have to maybe change tax here.
Yeah, brilliant, because the two things can happen at the same time. I fall into this trap sometimes, I think most of us do, of thinking in sort of homogenous terms, but half the population goes one way, half the population goes the other, possibly for the same reason. And that embracing of fake news versus the embracing of fact-checking actually both contribute to a space where we become more disillusioned with politicians, whether it's because you believe that they're all in the pay of George Soros and the WEF, or whether it's because you've checked their claims about taxes and found them to be complete hokum. You end up more disillusioned with politicians than you were before. Blimey. First class, mate. You started your call complimenting me. I'm ending it complimenting you on a coruscating analysis. 27 after 11 is the time. Sarah is in Hove. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I just want to say that all politicians, if they're not lying through their teeth, some of them are lying by omission. And being a staunch Labourite, I honestly think that Starmer is a really, really nice guy, a good guy.
Yeah.
But he's lying by omission. For a start, in that TV thing where the MP, the Prime Minister, was going on about £2,000. Yes, thank you, Sunak. Right, I'm trying to forget his name. He'll be gone soon.
It seemed you'd succeeded, I think. I apologise for reminding you now.
No, please don't remind me.
I won't.
Anyway, he's lying about the £2,000. It's been disproved, and yet Starmer still isn't, cutting that down every single time anybody says it. And they're still saying it. They're still...
Yeah, but that just knocks the gloss off Keir Starmer as an individual politician. It doesn't explain a disillusionment with the whole tribe, does it? Does it?
Well, no, but it does, because I know him. Well, I don't know him, but he seems to come across as a really good egg, and yet even he can't knock them all into next week by saying, but that's just a lie.
Yeah, yeah.
It just makes me angry that he won't put up. He won't be.
Well, he has tried. To be honest with you, you're right. In the context of that debate, he absolutely fluffed it, and he tried to do it late, but it was too late by the time it had come. It was too little, too late. And you're right. Sunak is continuing to thump that drum, even as the chief secretary to the Treasury and the head of the Office of National Statistics have all told them to stop it, or that it's not true.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter, and he's doubled and tripled and quadrupled down on it. But that the idea that it speaks to a disillusionment with politics in general, or politicians in general, is a tad unfair, because they've used the word lie. I was talking to someone who's worked on previous campaigns about this, and it's possibly gone a little bit unnoticed what a big deal that is, to actually use the word lie. It's as if the gloves are off. There's gentlemanliness of previous eras. I'd suggest Boris Johnson probably did more to blow this up than anybody else, because it was proved that he lied to the House of Commons knowingly. But to say that Sunak is lying, that is actually a much more robust response than you would have got from, for example, Ed Miliband.
But he hasn't said it actually in Parliament, because they're not allowed to use that word, are they?
No, they're not. No, they're not. That's part of the reason why they don't use it outside. Go on.
Yeah. I did hear him use it the other day, I must admit, and that brought me up, because I didn't think they were allowed to say it at all about
that's because they never have done before, really. But sometimes it's just... it's the only word that fits. But so I take your point, and I like this. It's disillusionment with the politicians who might feel a little bit aggrieved that everybody is disillusioned with politicians, because they have actually been telling the truth for the last few years, or getting things right. But the first caller points out Starmer in particular isn't telling the truth now about Brexit for reasons, and Sarah reminds us that if you're looking to the opposition at the moment to beard these deceptions, to re-steer, if you like, the ship of British politics onto an even keel, then they're not doing that very effectively either. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:33, and in the next part of the programme, we will talk to Professor Sir John Curtis about the research he's conducted into trust and confidence in government, and we'll move into an area we haven't touched on yet, which is disillusionment with the electoral system itself. I think around half, if not slightly more, of the population disillusioned with the first past the post system, which plays into the calls that we've taken so far, doesn't it? Because if you are disillusioned with the choice, then the system that delivers that choice quickly becomes part of the problem as well. I would like to hear from somebody in this category of people who voted for Brexit and who cite the failure of Brexit as a reason to be disillusioned with politicians, because I don't know where you're coming from. Are you still, and I'll try to be polite if you do, all right? But are you still thinking that there is a good Brexit, it just goes to a different school, which I presume is Farage's position on this, as opposed to observable reality, is still signing up to the unicorn idea? Oh no, there is a brilliant Brexit, but it goes to a different school, and that somehow it's the fault of Theresa May or Boris Johnson. Is it just immigration, for example, in that, you know, we don't care about the actual conversation about whether we need it or not, you just want less. And you've ended up with more. And the reason you voted for Brexit, in some cases knowing you'd be poorer, was because you thought that the foreigners would really get it in the neck. I'm not exactly tempting you to ring in, am I, with these analyses? But so let me try again. You voted for it, and its failure has left you more disillusioned with politicians than you were, for example, 3 years ago. Who are you blaming? Because I might politely suggest it's probably time to start blaming yourself now, isn't it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 25 to 12. Sam's in Tooting. Sam, what would you like to say? Back to the broader question of disillusionment.
I actually think it's more to do with how obvious the politicking of everybody is right now. So I think that politics is a really dirty game, and actually the aim is to get into power, and that is always the case with parties across the board throughout time. But right now, it just feels so obvious that both parties are doing it. So we're obviously disillusioned with the current governing party, but then the opposition, it feels like they are doing every move they make is damage limitation and ensuring they get as many votes as possible, and that's fine. That is what you're supposed to do. But it's so obvious that it makes you think, well, what's the belief system here? And you've seen that from the other side for so long. It feels like that's where someone says they're all the same. Well, they are, because they're all playing the same game. They all want to get into power, and that's what you need to do. But that's where it really drives home. It's like, well, what does anyone really think? Do they just want to secure power? And it makes you very disillusioned with it. So
you're casting inspiration as the opposite of disillusionment, aren't you? So because there is nothing to be inspired by, disillusionment sets in.
Exactly.
I like that.
It becomes so obvious, the moves that they make, the way that they speak, like not answering anything, but you see it on both sides, where you see Keir Starmer in the most recent debate essentially not saying anything about what they're planning to do in the future. But then you talk about, I can't remember what the name of the minister went out and said to every question, well, Labour have admitted that doing this to public schools...
Emily Thornberry.
Yes, Emily
Thornberry. What's the weather like today? It was Richard Holden, the chairman of the Conservative Party. What are you having for tea? Emily Thornberry. What's the weather like today? Emily Thornberry. What would you like to say about your own recent behaviour? Emily Thornberry. I mean, that clip... Well, that I would almost cite, Sam, as a refutation of what you're saying, because that is an example. They're not all like that. I mean, the reason why, and we might dig that out again, actually, that Richard Holden clip from earlier in the week where he answered every question with the words Emily Thornberry, and the great John Craig finally ran out of patience. That surely works against your point, because that was so extraordinarily Go on.
They are at that level of desperation.
Yeah, but
right?
only he is. Even Grant Shapps isn't as bad as that.
Yeah, sure. He's a terrible performer, and the Tory party has a dearth of talent generally in the political space. But the point is that actually they're at that level of desperation, but then you look over at the other side and it feels very similar, not to the same level and not to the same degree, but it does feel similar when you're looking at somebody being asked, what are you going to do about this? And you're not being given serious answers. I can't remember who, I think it was the IMF had said that both political parties
IFS,
are not
the
being...
Institute for Fiscal Studies,
Yes,
Paul Lewis, saying that they're both coming up with promises without explaining where the money's going to come from.
Exactly. They're not being honest with us about what the scale of the difficulties is. And the reason they're doing that is because they are politicking. And it is so clear. Everybody sort of has this idea of like this inspirational leader who really truly believes something and really pushes it through. And that's kind of what you think about as the ideal politician, someone who really believes
who would
that.
be
In
on
reality,
that? Who
they're
would you?
Much grubbier.
Yeah. So what would you want to see then? I mean, I can answer that question a bit in terms of just possibly saying things.
Well, we can bring it back to Brexit,
Right.
which I know that's a favourite of the show, right?
Sure.
But we can look at that and
Well,
say,
it's crucial to
that's
this
a
research,
really...
actually. Absolutely crucial to this research, but not necessarily from my position, which is it was going to be awful and it is awful. What a bunch of chancers. But people who thought it was going to be brilliant now are very disillusioned with politicians in general. So it is relevant.
So that's a really clear one where we all know Keir Starmer was the Brexit minister. He wanted the shadow Brexit minister. He is ardently against it, and he is not coming out and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. They're basically not saying anything on it. And everybody watching knows that is because they are playing politics.
I think I'm being held hostage here by my own silo, because the research looks at the dashed Brexit expectations as a source of disillusionment with politics, but you're the second or third caller now to cite disillusionment with the people that opposed it for no longer opposing it, to which you could sort of respond by saying, well, they've lost that battle. Why would they want to relitigate it already?
Because that is the evidence of when you are playing politics. When you know someone holds an ideological position that they really truly believe in, and they're
pretending not to. That's
exactly.
I don't think this is part of the polling. Actually, I don't think this is a big part of the survey, but it's a big part of my thinking now. Thanks to you and a couple of other callers. You want someone like Nye Bevan, don't you? Really?
There are plenty of other examples as well.
Yeah.
If you think about some of the pledges, for example, and look, I am more left than Starmer. I'm more on the sort of Rayner side. But if you think about some of the pledges he made to the membership when I actually voted for him and Rayner to become the leader and deputy leader, some of those pledges have been dropped that I think are popular and that he does believe in, but they have been dropped on the basis of politicking, and we all know it and we can all see it.
Sacrificed at the altar of achieving power would be the positive interpretation of that, and the defence would be, I made those promises before Liz Truss drove the country off a cliff, so I can't keep them. I can't keep them now. But Rayner is a good example of what you're describing. Angela Rayner gives pretty direct answers to questions, even if sometimes it embarrasses her colleagues.
And she is definitely one of the politicians who I would say gives me hope.
Joanna, or rather Angela. It's 11:42. That was a pop music reference that I'm increasingly conscious of the fact not everybody's going to get because of my age. What was I talking about yesterday? So I think I was talking to someone who'd never heard of Aha. Can you imagine never having heard of Aha? Oh, what a Gobi desert of a cultural existence you must have led if you've never heard of Morton, Mags and Paul. Sam, great stuff. Thank you. Simon's at Heathrow. Simon, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
I missed the start of the programme. But,
Why?
I gathered you asked people to phone up because they're disillusioned with politicians because they haven't carried through what they could have done with Brexit.
Yes.
So, regarding the immigration thing, we've now, when we was in the EU, we couldn't control who came, how many people came. Anyone from the EU was entitled to come.
Well, no, that's not true. I mean, this argument is dead now, but we could have done a hell of a lot more than we did, as other countries demonstrated, like Belgium, for example. But we chose not to because of the economic necessity of high immigration. But of course,
what else could we have done then? I thought it was free movement of people.
No, you can have some rules in place with regard to the secure of employment before you come. And I think if the Belgian model holds, you could even lay down some requirements on having capital. You'd have to prove that you had certain levels of capital.
Really? Oh, sorry. Oh, well,
it's all right, mate. It's only 8 years late. It's only 8 years late, Simon.
Say it again?
It's only 8 years late that this penny has dropped, but better late than never, eh?
Well, why didn't we do? Why didn't we? I understood that it was free movement of people. So when we left the EU, we can create our own laws and we can stop people coming.
Yeah.
And now, you know, they promised us that, and then when we left, the figures have gone up. So that's basically why I've lost trust in
because they keep on coming.
Well, they've gone up even more, haven't they?
Yeah, the highest ever.
That's the reason I've lost, you know, confidence in the politicians, because we were told one thing and then they don't.
I think there's a lot of. Well, there'll certainly be a lot of Brexit voters out there who feel like you do. You were promised that the numbers would come down. No one ever took the time to explain to you why that was not necessarily either a good thing or an inevitable consequence of Brexit, and you've watched them go up. It's free movement just to help you. No, it's free movement of it's free movement of labour, free movement of workers, not free movement of people. So member states, I don't know if this is true of Schengen. I think it is actually, but of course we're not in Schengen, so it doesn't matter. But
so my wife's Latvian, and
your wife's Latvian.
They couldn't stop her from coming. They actually deported her brother because he was homeless, didn't have a job, and was sleeping outside Harrods. When the Olympics come along, they deported him, but they couldn't stop him coming back. He just got the coach back again.
Yeah, well, they couldn't stop him coming back because they can't go through the sort of papers of is Latvia in the EU?
Yeah, what do you mean is Latvia in the EU?
Is Latvia in the EU? I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember. Yeah, so because we weren't imposing that rule, Simon. They could have said, unless you've got a job, or unless you can demonstrate you've got a certain level of savings, you can't come into this country like they would have done in Belgium. But we didn't do that.
He came back. I think they deported him twice. They even put him into.
But we didn't. That wasn't because we were in. That wasn't because we were in the EU. That was because we chose not to impose rules that we could have imposed if we'd wanted to. But the cost of imposing them would have been far, far, far higher than any benefits of keeping people like your brother-in-law out of the country.
Right. Okay. Well, I didn't understand the rules probably. I just thought
Wait, you're a Brexit voter. No offence, but none of them understood anything on this particular subject. And it's not your fault. It's because people have been lying to you since the words Nigel Farage first appeared in the British news bulletins.
Oh, okay. How could they stop it? And it wasn't free movement of people.
Free movement of labour, not people. Free movement of workers.
Okay, then I did misunderstand it. But
don't feel bad about it. I mean, everyone who voted for Brexit did. So 17 million of you. There's strength in numbers. But the crucial point is it would never have happened anyway because the costs of imposing those sort of rules would have been prohibitive and the benefits of having free movement of labour were immense. So you don't tell millions of workers from continental Europe that they can't come now because of people like your brother-in-law sleeping rough outside Harrods. Do you see what I mean? He's outnumbered to the nth degree by the millions, by people who came here, worked, paid taxes, made big contributions to our economy, and then thanks to your vote in 2016 got told to sod off.
Yeah, he's working now. So he's sorted himself out. He had a bit of problem with drink, but he's okay now. But
I'm glad to hear it.
The other reason was, the laws. We can. I just want to. I like smaller government for me, the better. So
hang on a minute, because if you wanted to impose those sort of rules that you've just been calling for with regard to foreign people coming here, you'd need a much bigger government.
I mean, as in rather being governed by something that governs the whole of Europe over something that just governs the UK.
Right.
But I just think they're more accountable. When the smaller the government, the more accountable they are.
Okay. So how's that working out for you then?
Well, I mean, it's not very good because they're letting in even more people.
No, I meant on the accountability, because we've been out of the EU for 8 years now. So how's that working out for you?
What do you mean? How's it working out?
On the accountability, we're now governed from where we were never governed from Brussels. But I can't I can't stay here all day. I've got John Curtis waiting to talk to me after the break. So we were never governed from Brussels, but for people who believed that we are now governed from Westminster. How much better are things for you, do you think?
Well, so you're saying that the laws they made in Brussels, we didn't have to follow?
Well, yeah. Which laws are you thinking about now?
Eh?
Which laws are you thinking about?
I'm not that clever, mate.
No, but you can't dislike something that you can't describe. The law that you really didn't like, just one law that you.
So you're saying that the laws were passed in by the EU in Brussels.
Yeah.
Had no effect on us.
I'm saying they were also
passed
here.
No, we're not taking any.
Tell me what law you're talking about. Tell me what law you're talking about, and I'll answer you.
I'm telling you, I'm not that.
Yeah, but there must be one law. If this is your entire political position is based upon the idea that you resent having to follow these laws, you must be able to tell me one law that you resent having to follow.
No, I'm just saying in general.
Yeah, and I'm saying, all right.
You tell me one law that they made that we could have stopped following it.
Clean rivers.
Sorry?
Clean rivers. We've stopped following that.
Well, while we was in the EU?
Yeah, we had cleaner rivers then than we do now.
Oh, I've got an aeroplane going past. So you're telling me,
so, all right,
you're telling me that they could have made the laws that they made in the EU. We could have just ignored.
No, mate. I'm asking you which laws you wanted to ignore.
I didn't follow it that closely. I'm not that clever.
Mate. Listen, Simon, you are clever. You must know. You say to me, "I don't like that."
Listen, I'm saying to you.
Oh, this is surreal.
If they made laws in the EU, could we have just we've just ignored it.
Simon, we're not
taking notice of that law.
We were in the EU. We were part of the law-making process. We sat in the Parliament. We wrote the laws, and then they.
About 1/32 of the EU.
Mate. Look at what Margaret Thatcher achieved with regards to the single market. She practically invented it, Simon.
Okay, Brian.
But you need to. You need to you need to just before you go, you've got to have a crack at naming one law that you really, really wanted to be able.
Before I go, how about you telling me that so you just.
It's my show, mate. Come on, I'm very late. I'm late for the break. I just want one law. No, you can't ignore laws that have been enshrined in.
You can't even confirm that.
Mate, it's British law. Simon, they are British laws. That's how the system worked. We are part of. For heaven's sake! Right, final opportunity. Final opportunity.
We could have just ignored the laws.
Yes, like that. Okay, the 48. Yes, the 48-hour working time directive. You could get exemptions from that if you wanted. You wouldn't. If you're a lorry driver or a journalist, you wouldn't have to have a limit on the amount of hours of work that you could do. I have to go to the break, but I just want you before you go. One law that you really didn't want to have to.
How many times have I got to tell you? I didn't follow it that close.
But you're on national radio complaining about having to follow laws that you can't even name. This is like Groundhog Day.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:55 is the time. Professor Sir John Curtis is the Senior Research Fellow at the National Centre for Social Research and, of course, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. The survey published by NatCen has been conducted annually and finds this year that public trust and confidence in government and politicians is at a record low. And Professor Sir John joins me now. What surprised you most personally from the latest round of findings?
To be honest, I wasn't that surprised because having first of all identified back in with our 2020 survey that trust and confidence had risen in particular amongst Leave voters, and that was clearly tied to the fact that Brexit had been delivered. Indeed, it reversed an historical relationship. Historically, those who are relatively keen on the European Union always tended to also be more trusting of government in this country, but that pattern got reversed. But I've been following the Brexit story probably too intensely than is good for my health.
You and me both, John.
During the last 4 years, and I'm perfectly well aware that, it's not been a dramatic turnaround, but it's certainly, we've now got a majority of us who would like to be inside the European Union. But in particular, when people are being asked about the consequences of Brexit, even if they've not necessarily changed their minds about how they would vote, there's been an increase in support, marked increase in support amongst those who voted for Brexit, who think that the economy has suffered as a result. And above all, they have very, very much changed their minds about the implications of immigration. In fact, those who voted Leave are now more likely to think than those who voted to remain that as a result of Brexit, immigration is higher than it otherwise would have been. So to that extent, at least, I was kind of anticipating that it might well be the case that Leave voters in particular had seen a decline in support, a decline in trust and confidence. But of course, also then we have to be more broadly, right? This has been a tough 5 years for the United Kingdom.
Of course.
And against that backdrop, again, should we be surprised that the public are concerned and worried and somewhat distrustful of the political system that's been governing them?
The survey itself makes this distinction more clearly than some of the headlines today do, the distinction between government and politicians. But could opposition politicians who haven't had a sniff of power for 14 years feel a little aggrieved at being lumped in with the broader malaise?
Well, Lars, that's the nature of the questions that we ask. Certainly it won't surprise you to hear, James, that at the moment, given their party is out of government, that Labour supporters tend to be somewhat more distrustful than our Conservative supporters, and it may well be that turns around. But of course, one suspects that once their party is out of office, what's left of Conservative supporters will become less trustful. But I think the point is that it does indicate that the challenge to the next administration, whatever its partisan colour, yes, one of the ways in which people will be persuaded the system is working, if indeed the health service starts to work, social care improves, the economy grows, etc., etc. All of that is true. But I think it's also clear that there is a question of discourse in our politics, and that people, at the moment are, we've seen this in opinion polls, are somewhat sceptical of the fact that our politicians are talking a lot about the things they're going to do, about the taxes they're not going to increase or maybe even cut, and not saying very much at all about how we ensure that GB PLC has got adequate core funding during the course of the next 4 or 5 years.
And finally, how do we sit with other countries on these sort of questions? Have we got higher levels? I know they're higher than our previous levels, but where do we sit in comparison to comparable economies and countries?
Well, this at the moment is an international study. If you come back to me next year, James, some of the questions that we asked were indeed asked as part of an international study, and I will be able to give you a much better answer to that question. But the truth is that much of the Western world has been suffering not dissimilar problems to the ones that we've been facing, leaving Brexit aside. So I will certainly anticipate that we will find not dissimilar patterns in many other so-called advanced industrial economy.
Well, it's a date. Professor Sir John Curtice, many thanks, as ever, for your time and your insights. John, as you know, the Senior Research Fellow at NatSen and Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. Also, I'm legally required to describe him as the doyen of polling experts. If I don't describe him as that, then it's straight to the... If any broadcasters fail to describe him as the doyen of polling experts, it's straight to the Tower of London. It's 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. A number of people who've got in touch with me to say, have I just woken up in 2017? As a consequence of the call that we took just before John Curtice joined us. Seriously, if I had £1 for everybody who's got in touch with me, either via my inbox or even privately, like friends, my phone's pinging. So what my favourite, I think, said, I left the office listening to a show in 2024. I got into my car, turned the radio on, and apparently I was back in 2016. Ah, dear. I think we'll change the pace, change the tone completely now, because this is a really important issue, actually. And it's one that underpins... I almost cited this as not politics. I was thinking, do we want to carry on? I've got that bit between my teeth. Politics-tastic today. Everything's politics this and politics that. And now we're going to do a subject. I said to Eleanor in the break, should we be staying with politics? But this is actually pure politics. This is of all the issues that the next Prime Minister will have to face, whether they are currently acknowledging them or not. This is immense. We, more than any other, what phrase did he use? Developed economies? What was the phrase he used to describe? Well, anyway, it sounded very clever. I wish I'd written it down. Of all comparable countries, we are the only one, I think, in the post-pandemic period that is seeing worklessness rise or not come down. This is people classed as inactive. It's the number of adults who are neither in a job nor looking for one. It's the highest it has been since 2011, and this does have consequences for economic growth. Tony Wilson, who's the director of the Institute for Employment Studies, says that when employment stops growing, so does the economy. And this Parliament has seen the largest rise in economic inactivity and the largest contraction in the size of the workforce since records began in 1971. And this is part of the reason why half of businesses, according to the Institute of Directors, are struggling to hire staff. And then a few of you are a bit cross for me for not being more robust with Simon, who rang in from Heathrow. In my defence, there's no point anymore falling out with people like Simon. Back in the day, when I was taking calls like that every day, there was still a chance of turning the oil tanker around. There was still a chance of a second referendum. A measure twice, cut once. But that ship has sailed. There's no point me beating him up. And also, I don't particularly want to. I didn't enjoy it enormously at the time because we were all going to be victims of votes that were cast on from positions of that level of ignorance. But no, I'm not. It's still got a bit of passion for the conned, I'm afraid, even if you don't think they deserve it anymore. I'm allowed to disagree with you about that. But of course, what Simon reminds us of is that even as we deal as a country with huge problems in the workplace, almost half of businesses struggling to hire staff, we still have a lot of voices in politics and in the population at large insisting that we need to bring fewer people in from overseas, which makes this cohort of people, the economically inactive, it makes them absolutely politically pertinent, a hugely important political constituency. You're right, I didn't tell you about Amber Rudd. Remind me to do that before I go home. Why Amber Rudd is a bit of a corrective to the disillusionment that we were talking about in the last hour, at least for me. So the problem we've got here, I think, and I could be completely wrong about this, the problem we've got here is that Mel Stride and his mates have tried to cast all of these people as being work shy or lazy or inventing mental health problems. I don't know how we pick a number, because you've got 2.83 million people blaming long-term sickness, at which point you go, crikey, well, maybe Mel Stride's got a point. But when I tell you the total number of people who are classed as economically inactive, i.e. people who are neither in a job nor looking for one, then that 2.83 million begins to look almost irrelevant. This is where the politics gets really interesting, because the total figure, I'm tempted to ask you to guess, actually. I do this for a living, and every single time this story comes around, I think there's a typo in the papers. Every single time I read the number of people, the number of adults of an age where they could be working who are not through choice, they are neither in a job nor looking for one. Every single time I see that number, I do a double take and think that there has been a misprint, think that there has been a typographical error. Because the answer is 9.4 million in the 3 months to April. So the unemployment figure is about 1.5 million now, which is the highest number since 2021. But that is people who are looking for work. You then have the 2.83 million, which is people who are long-term sick, something that it is very hard to get signed off as, whatever you may hear from some Conservative politicians and their friends in the client media. It leaves, whichever way you dice it, it leaves in the region of 6 million people, just shy of 6 million people, who are not working. And those are the people I want to talk to today. Because I think you might be the most important part of this conversation. So I want to talk to people, and we did this in the immediate aftermath of lockdown, didn't we? And it was really, really interesting. I think that the great unacknowledged majority of these people have made a lifestyle choice to live off not the pittance that you get on benefits or even the state pension, but you've made calculations to not work anymore. So you are living off savings, or you've freed up equity in your home, or you've downsized, or you're lucky enough to have, and wise enough to have made pension provisions for yourself privately. A great friend of mine who I thought had at least another, I would have thought that they might have done a Jimmy Young, actually, and stayed in the job, stayed on air until they were dragged kicking and screaming from the studio in their 80-something year. I know people who made calculations during lockdown because lockdown showed them something that they hadn't previously noticed, and it showed them an alternative. So you made calculations, and I'm talking obviously about a relatively privileged part of the population. I'm not talking about people who have elected to live on the pittance that the welfare state provides. I'm talking about people who've been able to cut their cloth accordingly, and for reasons that I want you to explain to me, your disillusionment with the workplace, the relationship with employers, or the reality of being self-employed, you just realised. And I think lockdown's really relevant to this because it is lockdown that we're using as the starting off point to conclude that we've gone more than any other comparable economy, or in fact, we're the only developed economy where the employment rate has fallen since the COVID pandemic. And this is extraordinary. This is extraordinary. It's not happening in other countries. The UK, according to the fellow from the Institute for Employment Studies, is virtually the only developed economy where the employment rate has fallen since the pandemic. So more people post-pandemic have decided that they're not going to work anymore. They're going to make ends meet without wages, without salary, without monthly income in return for labour. And I think that you have done that very consciously. And I think the biggest political miscalculation of the moment in the context of economic growth and the relationship with the workforce is the myth that all of these people, these 9 million people, are either pretending to be depressed or lazy. You've done your bit. You've got into your 50s or your 60s. You've worked bloody hard, or maybe you're lucky enough not to have had to work hard in order to achieve a degree of financial security, but you recalibrated during lockdown. You realised, actually, I don't need to do this. I could live differently. There was a great piece of graffiti. I mention it to you all the time. I've got a mental block on what road it is. If you're coming in from Stokenchurch on the motorway, is that the M40? You're coming in from Oxford. Is that the M40? There used to be this amazing bit of graffiti. If you're coming into London from the Midlands, it hasn't been there for years. It was there when I was at university, I think. And I didn't really get it because I'd never been a commuter. I'd never have, oddly, managed to reach the age of 52 without ever being a car commuter. But there was this amazing bit of graffiti, and it said, why do I still do this every day? And of course, its positioning meant that everybody commuting into London from the Midlands, and from Oxfordshire and from Stokenchurch and all of those sort of necks of the wood, everybody would see this graffiti every single morning. And I thought it was almost a poem, you know? Or it reminded me of a Kinks lyric, you know, when Ray Davies writes about the rigmarole of the quotidian existence and sort of his determination not to become part of it. That, why do I still do this every day? Why do I still do this every day? I think you're right, Chip. I think the current fence, I think the same bit possibly now says give peas a chance. Peas as in P-E-A-S. But certainly for a very long time it said, why do I still do this every day? Now, I think that a lot of people during lockdown asked themselves that question. Why do I still do this every day? And I've got two questions for you. What was it like is question one. And question two is, why would the UK be a particular case study on this issue? Why would the UK be unique in the context of people deciding that they don't want to work anymore? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So talk me through what you did, whether or not you regret it, or whether or not you might go back, because I do think if we are going to have a Prime Minister, Conservative or Labour, who have now signed up to the nativist approach to immigration and will publicly claim that they want to bring it down while privately having to acknowledge that we need it to go up, the only way you can change that record is by getting people already in the country not working through choice to choose to go back to work. I want to know how plausible or how feasible that is. Off the top of my head, I'd say not very. But then you're left with the question of what is it about the UK that has created this unique set of circumstances? So three ways into this. The first is, did you do that? Actually, you chose, you've juggled your finances and you've decided, you've chosen not to work anymore. And am I right in thinking that ignoring that cohort of the population makes a complete mockery of all policy making in the arena of unemployment and growth? Number two, could you be tempted back? Have a think about that. You may not have thought about it for a while. How could you be tempted back by government policy? What would that look like? And number three, what was it about you and your country? What was it about the UK's relationship with work that has turned us into pretty much the only developed economy on the planet where the employment rate has fallen since the pandemic? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 12:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 19 after 12. Keith just said, after lockdown, I decided not to work anymore. He said, I still turn up every day, but hey-ho. Yeah. 19 minutes after 12 is the time. The question is, am I right in thinking that this relationship between worklessness and economic growth is actually a bigger problem than the government that pretends it's all down to faking depression or being lazy acknowledge? In other words, why did you knock it on the head? What was the process, the calculations that you made that led you to conclude, do you know what? I don't have to do this. I don't have to do this, and I'm not going to anymore. Mary is in Framlingham to kick things off. Mary, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Mary.
Yes, my husband and I are exactly what you're talking about. We decided to give up work during COVID to retire early. We've sort of retired 2 years before we get our state pension, and we're using savings and private pension to live off. So
any regrets?
Exactly what you're talking about. No, not at all. In fact, we've just come back from driving around Germany and Belgium, and we've just come off the shuttle.
Oh, how delightful! And you wouldn't have been doing that. And this. Yeah, so something happened during furlough, as if you started looking at the world in a slightly different way, and the path that had been preordained for you right up until retirement age suddenly branched off, and you could see other alternatives.
Sure.
I think we've lost the phone line, but this is what I'm talking about. This is exactly what I'm talking about. It's all very well Mel Stride and his mates banging on about people who are economically inactive. They're not economically inactive. They're still spending their savings, spending their pensions, spending their money, downsizing their houses perhaps, and they don't want to go back to work. We're running a very real risk of having a government of either Conservative or Labour hue building economic policies upon the presumption that these people can somehow be coerced or tempted back to work when they can't. Sarah is in Swansea. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello.
Basically, I nursed my mum through pancreatic cancer in 2019, just before the pandemic hit.
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's fine, thank you. I actually worked for the ambulance service at the time, so I took 6 months off, nursed my mother, and she passed away. Obviously, after that, I was in the midst of a very, very great storm.
I'm being tortured by my phone lines. I lost you a bit there, Sarah. I do apologise.
Sorry.
No, you carry on.
Sorry, that's okay. So basically, I decided not to go back in Italy. Then the COVID hit,
No, I'm sorry, Sarah. I don't know what's happened there. 2 for 2, but I'm sure that Amy in Norwich will break the cycle and speak clearly and continuously for the duration of her call. Amy, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I think I fit into what you're talking about very easily.
Yeah.
My husband and I made the decision that once we had children or our first child in 2015, that I wouldn't return to work.
Right.
Mainly childcare issues. My salary was not likely to cover childcare for our child at the time and any subsequent children we had. And frankly, in terms of wage, it very much swung in his favour. Cue the pandemic, I actually returned to work because he stopped travelling with his job.
Okay, so you could share the childcare burden a little bit more during that.
Yeah, and just because he wasn't away, he wasn't travelling, he was working from home, no longer such long hours. And I did that for a period of time, and by the gist of your previous caller, actually, I stopped to look after an ill family member.
Okay.
And I currently have no intention to go back to work. We actually moved from the outskirts of London to Norfolk.
Lovely. During lockdown? During lockdown?
No, 18 months ago, so just coming out of it.
Okay. Whereabouts in Norfolk are you, if you don't mind me asking?
We are to the east of Norwich, so not the lovely part of the North Norfolk, but not far away.
Oh, lovely.
And actually what I'm doing now is I'm learning new skills in that I'm part renovating our house because we figured that it would cost just as much to pay someone to do it as what I could do myself.
It's a very good point, isn't it?
And this is our pension, effectively, the house that we've bought.
So this is. I think you're another great. There's going to be quite a lot of different strands, isn't there, to this phenomenon? But you are definitely one of them. You've made calculations, partly due to experiences that you had during lockdown, but not entirely. You've made calculations that have left you in a different place from the one that you probably be expected to be in 10 years ago.
Yeah, and additionally to that, our eldest child is currently under assessment for some special educational needs stuff.
So you being around becomes doubly helpful, doubly valuable.
We find it really important. And I was saying to your producer that I would go back to work, but not at the cost of it affecting our family, our relationship, and everything else. We don't have childcare. It's not an option. And our son's school has actually, in the last couple of weeks, just announced that they're now going to have a longer half term in October. That's another week that parents are trying to scramble around for childcare.
That's really interesting. I know you're conscious. You're conscious of the financial security that allows you to make some of these decisions that not everybody would have. But equally, the cost of childcare these days slightly chips away at that observation. What you've done there as well, Amy, is remind me what I'm looking for, the unique bits about Britain. Why is Britain the only country that's ended up in these places? And actually, I think workplace flexibility might be part of it, because I know certainly that Scandinavian employers, Northern European countries, really recognise the difficulties of parenting and working, whereas your traditional employers here don't, which makes people much more likely to make the decisions that you've made.
Absolutely. And we always come back to Scandinavia whenever we talk about this. And, my husband worked across Europe for a period of time, and there were conversations about, maybe we should just hop over to Scandinavia where this could work a bit better. We're in a really lucky position now. We realise that we're fortunate. I am, one of the things that I'm very keen on my children learning is that it's not a mum stays at home, dad goes out to work situation.
Sure.
This is
Mum's building a house, practically, single-handedly.
Yes.
Well, can you fix it? Yes, I can. And again, you're a brilliant example of why this phrase, actually, final question, what does the phrase economically inactive make you feel?
I mean, I tell you what, my days are more active than a lot of people's.
I know they are. That's why it's a ludicrous phrase, and it actually feeds into the mythologies of of work shyness or fake illness. Or I mean, that's the problem that they've done. It's unlikely, isn't it, given the polling, that the Tories are going to be around to reap what they've sowed with these lazy stereotypings. But you look Amy in the eye and tell her that she's economically inactive, looking after the children, conducting renovations on the house, running a family, dealing with a husband who's travelling for work a lot, and the calculation is, do you know what? It's better for me to be here than it is for me to be hopping back on the hamster wheel of full-time employment. And economically inactive doesn't really seem to touch the sides of that life. And that is a lifestyle choice. Dave's in Warwick. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hey, James.
Hello, Dave.
I guess I phoned up. Again, first-time caller, long-time.
Welcome,
mate. Admirer, usual
Welcome.
stuff.
Thank you.
I'm just about to become economically inactive, kind of voluntarily.
Right.
I'm 57. And I've been, again, lucky enough to be able to provide a personal pension and overpay my mortgage, and so kind of have, less, don't need to work. And I think what it is that's made me realise is, over the last year, 18 months, I'm just working to make rich people richer. My company isn't really investing in what we're doing. They are cutting back on things in order to keep the profits high, to pay the dividends, to make the rich people who own the company even richer. And I don't want to do it anymore.
And that maybe plays into what is it about the UK that is, if not unique, then certainly one of the worst performers in this field. And it would be, as we've seen, I guess the water companies are the most famous example of it at the moment, but it holds true across an awful lot of sectors, that the prioritisation of dividends and payouts and taking money out of a business over everything from research and development for the future, right through to wages for the ordinary workers, to use a slightly infelicitous phrase, is a peculiarly British and American malaise in many ways, and you're on the wrong end of it. Are you surprised that you've arrived at how big a sort of mountain was it to climb to? Because late 57, I think you said. That's that's a lot earlier than you were intending to knock it on the head, when I suggest you were 47, for example.
Well, God, 47, I wasn't even thinking about it.
Exactly.
I was just living within my means. Yeah. And I was kind of planning on another 5 or 10 years, I guess.
Yeah.
I thought I'd got another 1 or 2 5-year jobs.
Yeah. And then you just thought, hang on a minute, why should I?
Yeah, and also you add into that, again, you get into your 50s and you start to have friends have health problems.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of friends who've got people who've died. Who
Same
are my
here,
age.
mate. Sniper's Alley, they call it, don't they? Between 50 and 60.
So you start to think, actually, what you hear of these people dying, and you think, what actually is important? And if I don't have to work, should I? And I could be tempted back by the right company with the right role, with the right morals.
Yeah,
something I enjoy to do,
but not being a sort of. I love that story. In fact, I said to Eleanor earlier when we decided we were going to talk about this, and she'd not heard it before, but you probably have, because I've told this about 1,000 times. But the boss who takes Dave's boss takes him out into the car park, puts an arm around his shoulder, and shows him his new Ferrari. And he says to Dave, "Look at that, Dave." He said, "I tell you what, if you work really hard for the next few years, I'll be able to buy another one."
Yeah, and it is very much that.
I know.
I'm disillusioned. And you talked to what would government policy have to be? Would government policy change me? In the short term, they don't do anything. But the government policy will influence what my company does. That might then make me make a different decision.
Yeah, I hear you.
I feel disappointed because I want to pay more tax. Right, I'm going to be taking tens of thousands of tax out of the system.
Yeah.
I'll still be actively economically because I'll be buying things. I just won't be working for another 5 years to do improvements to the house or to, I won't be doing big capital
Well, if you take it to
spending.
I mean, and then there's the other slightly simplistic argument. I like the line about doing a job you no longer enjoy to earn money to buy things you don't need to impress people you don't like. I'm not suggesting that's you, but it's quite a catchy description of some forms of capitalism. Dave, thank you for that. And of course, remember that we are hearing exclusively from people whose financial arrangements free them to make these choices. So again, this lazy stereotype idea that people are somehow living the life of Riley on state benefits doesn't apply to any of these callers. Idiot's Corner, though, Ian can go in. He goes, ask these callers, are they lefties? Most I know are lazy lefties. Ian, mate, these are people who are well off enough not to have to go to work anymore. You know, that used to be a position that was confined to the aristocracy. But you carry on doffing your cap and tugging your forelock, mate, while calling people who've been successful enough to be able to give up work early lazy lefties. Oh, Lord above. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue to question the idea that being economically inactive means you're part of some sort of Tory fever dream where you're simultaneously living the life of Riley on state benefits and cocking a snook at the working population. I think it's fair to say it's not true. Should we play another game? Do you want to play another game? Guess what the missing word from this news story is today. Close to 1 in 10 candidates for Gap Party in England are friends on Facebook with Gary Rakes, the British fascist leader, the Times has found. Rakes, a former organiser for the British National Party, founded the new British Union in the image of Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists, with activists who call themselves Black Shirts. The new British Union has called for a fascist revolution and sees parliamentary democracy as an obstruction to be replaced with a dictatorship. So which party running in the current election campaign has almost 1 in 10 of its candidates friends with the fella who is trying to bring back fascism? I can categorically state there will be no prizes on this one for correct guesses. Back to economic inactivity and the much more complex and complicated reality than most of the political rhetoric allows. Steve's in Brighton. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Steve.
I am in a very similar situation to everybody that's spoken. In COVID, I was working from home, staring out forlornly at my garden and wanting to be in it. And I basically looked at my finances and I thought to myself, you know, what am I working for? I'm building up this pot of savings. I'm looking at this kind of distant day in the future where I might gain this sort of freedom. And I thought, you know what, I can have it now. So I just downsized. I paid off the mortgage. I don't have any debt, and I've got 2 stepkids who are, well supported. Yeah. They're professionals. They're working, and I thought, you know what? Why not? What on earth am I doing? I've worked for 42 years. I've worked very hard. Yeah, I've built up my savings, and I thought, you know what? Life is actually about the quality of life, not just getting to the end of it and sort of looking back and regretting it, and so that was a decision that we took. And I have to say, I am as happy as Larry. I haven't looked back. I'm not spending as much money, but I'm sitting here in my garden. I'm just was doing some DIY, very mindful exercise, and I have to say, my mental health has never been better, and I would recommend it to everybody.
This is one of those subjects that has taken me by surprise, just in terms of the churn on the switchboard, Steve, the number of people. And you say that you're in the same position to previous callers, but we haven't actually heard the same story twice. We've heard we've heard half a dozen different accounts of how you've ended up in the same place, and yet you've come there from very different positions, and you are completely ignored by the political conversation. Whenever I see the headline economically inactive, I'm supposed to think of people who are faking depression, or of people who are, working in the black economy while changing benefits, or, of course, the biggest myth of all, that you can live a life of luxury on state benefits. You're completely excluded from the conversation. It's bizarre.
Well, we are, but also I would argue the point that I'm not actually economically inactive as such, because I'm actually lending this government several £100,000 of my personal savings with the national savings growth bonds.
Okay.
So the government is benefiting from my money. It's a slightly pejorative phrase saying...
It's an unhelpful phrase. It is pejorative because it conjures up an inactivity. Sounds like laziness, doesn't it?
It is. It absolutely does. I do voluntary work, and I'm open. In fact, I am looking at doing some self-employed sales agent work, but on a very, very part-time basis.
And on your terms, effectively.
On my terms.
Yeah.
The thing about this is, James, is I think that people really need to look at what are the virtues of life. And freedom and control self-actualisation are the greatest virtues in life, and the ability to control one's own destiny, which is maybe illusionary, but certainly that's how I feel.
Doesn't matter whether
and,
as long as it feels like you are, then it's working, isn't it? It doesn't.
Absolutely.
Why do you think? No, you go on.
I realise a lot of people listen to this saying, smug whatever, because, but I will refer to the fact that, I've worked in public service, the NHS. I've done a lot of good in my life for the last 42 years, so my conscience is clear on that particular.
And yet there's this line here, an interview Jeremy Hunt gave to the Mail on Sunday, I think last year, 50 is no time to put your feet up. You've got 20 more years of graft in you, which is such a disconnect with what you've just described, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's one rule for one and one rule for the others. I mean, Richie Sunak, he's a multi-millionaire, and you just sometimes, and I don't think it's just public service, you wonder why people who are super wealthy actually bother to do what they do. But, I mean, everybody's an individual.
They're never wealthy enough. That's a sort of Rupert Murdoch syndrome.
That's exactly the point that we've all assessed. We've looked at our own situations and we thought, hang on, we're not buying into this kind of concept that you have to keep acquiring stuff and earning money and end up being the richest person in the graveyard, which is what I absolutely do not want to be.
I hear you. No, and again, everyone acknowledges that choices choices cost money. I mean, money can't buy you love, it can't buy you happiness, but it can buy you choices, and some of those choices will include doors you can go through where happiness increases, or happiness is likely to increase. Self-actualisation, as Steve describes it, being something that is not within the reach of everybody who needs to keep earning in order to get to the end of the month, and needs to keep afloat. And that is a gulf in our society that politicians of both main parties seem to be missing, seem to be failing to recognise. So I don't know, what do you do? Cling to the notion that the country is full of people who fit the tabloid stereotypes, or recognise that of the 9.3 million, is it, so-called economically inactive people, or 9.4, a heck of a lot of them will be, by Tories' own definitions, successes. That's the problem. The phrase economic inactivity makes you think of laziness and even failure. So in the rhetoric of aspiration, it's a profoundly unhelpful phrase, which does much more than just denigrate the people in that category. It fails completely to recognise the reality of their existence. I think there's millions of people who have done what all our callers today have described. They have made conscious, intelligent, evidence-based choices to step away from what we would sort of traditionally call the rat race. Simon is in Wrexham. Simon, what would you like to say?
Okay, first-time caller.
Welcome aboard.
Looking at you a lot, but it's the first time I've actually phoned up to speak to you. I think I had a penny drop moment when you were going through your introduction and you were saying out the economically inactive, and I was exactly where some of the other callers have been with the, they're the layabouts, they're this, they're that, and then suddenly I realised, oh no, you're talking about me.
Oh, that's magic, isn't it?
It was. It was sort of like this light blossom, because I was fortunate just after COVID. I'm 61 now. I always wanted to retire at 60.
Right.
I'm fortunate since the mid-80s I've been with the final salary pension schemes in various different jobs. And just before I was due to retire, because of COVID, the company I was working for wanted to make reductions, so I got offered a redundancy package, which I thought, well, that'll add to my pension.
Yeah.
Took it. My wife is a bit older than me, and we decided we just need to spend time together, going off and doing things. And since then, we've been to America, we've been to Australia, we've been to various different places we'd never dream of going to. But the view is, let's do it while we still can. Because otherwise you get to a point where you can't go off and explore places, you can't do things that other people are doing because your body is giving up. And I did a bit of consultancy work, but as the previous caller said, you do it on your own terms, you can do it as and when. But in the last probably 4 months, we've had a number of friends that have passed away, and you suddenly realise, well, look, stop.
Focuses the mind. It focuses the mind, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There's you're on time in the ground, and you just need to be able to spend the time with. We've got grandchildren, we do the school runs, we do all these sort of things, and we just enjoy it.
Well, do you know what? Even something as simple as the school run is an illustration of how unhelpful this phrase economic inactivity is, because that then helps your children with their work-life balance. So the first caller over in Norfolk having to make decisions based upon childcare provision, which you doing the school run frees up some of those pressures from your family. So you're contributing to their economic activity, if you like. And the fact that you're spending money and living living your life, to describe it as inactive in any way, it's absurd, isn't it? It means that historically, anybody living off capital, which would once have just been the owning classes and the aristocracy, they've been economically inactive for thousands of years.
No, it is.
Go on.
With regards to the question, would I consider going back now? Absolutely not.
No, I think that's the problem.
Such a nice lifestyle.
Yeah, well, why would you? That's the problem that politicians have got. Unless they made you an offer you couldn't refuse, and that, of course, would be down to employers, not politicians. And that's why, sadly, the rhetoric of immigration, which is now almost as natural to Keir Starmer as it is to the Tories and obviously the Farage element, this rhetoric surrounding immigration that we'll just get our own, we'll just train our own, hinges upon what Simon beautifully described at the beginning of that call. It hinges upon the disconnect between people who are technically economically inactive not realising that that's who we're talking about when we talk about training our own or getting people back in to the workplace. They're not there because they're feckless or work shy or layabouts. They're not there because they've done their bit, thank you very much, and now they're going to be masters and mistresses of their own destiny. And I honestly don't know whether Mel Stride realises this. Or whether he realises it and pretends not to understand it, or whether he genuinely doesn't realise it at all. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and today's competition with no prizes for correct answers concludes with this sentence. Close to 1 in 10 candidates for Nigel Farage's Reform UK party in England are friends on Facebook with Gary Rakes, the British fascist leader, the Times has found. Farage, of course, with Nick Ferrari on the programme tomorrow. Quick visit to Idiot's Corner. Here's Alex says, let's talk about Farage and the attack that happened yesterday. Extra security, but you probably won't because it's not upping the Labour Party or slagging off Brexit. People have to stop throwing things at Nigel Farage. It's not only obviously dangerous and wrong, but it also allows him to claim that there's a left-wing mob pursuing him when it's some loser with a empty coffee cup. But regardless, I don't know what it might be tomorrow. So absolutely, everybody's got to stop throwing things at Nigel Farage. What you should do instead is ask him how he feels about the January the 6th lynch mob that was unleashed by Donald Trump and headed to Capitol Hill with the intention of hanging his former Vice President Mike Pence. Because and you can do that tomorrow. You could ring Farage on Nick's show tomorrow and make sure you've got all your facts in front of you about people who've been jailed, the police officers that faced mortal threat, the people who died that day, and how he still supports Donald Trump, who is describing these people as heroes and promising to pardon them all. So political violence is always wrong, whether it's people threatening to kill politicians or whether it's people throwing empty coffee cups at politicians. Political violence is always wrong, and you shouldn't allow anybody to pretend that it's terrible in some contexts but absolutely fine in others. So the number you'll need tomorrow morning is 0345 6060 973 if you want to ask Nigel Farage about his continuing support for a man that incited a mob, or a genuinely violent mob, to attack the seat of democracy in the United States of America. But in conclusion, also, obviously, Alec, as I wave you into Idiot's Corner, it's wrong to throw anything at politicians. Except, I suppose, non-profane insults. We all do that, don't we, sometimes? 12:51 is the time. Back to the economically inactive, which may well be the most unhelpful term in the current political lexicon. Gary's in Woolacombe in Devon. Gary, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello,
I confess I'm an economically inactive, lazy lefty. But before we explore that, can I just quickly make a point about
political violence. Very quickly.
Yeah.
And I'm not making light of it because it's wrong in all its forms.
Well, make sure you're not making light of it in that case.
No, I'm just going to tell you a quick story, very, very briefly. Jacob Rees-Mogg's got 7 children. He said he's never changed the nappy in his life.
Yes.
So my wife said someone should throw a dirty nappy at him because he won't know what to hit him.
That's a good joke, but she's not actually encouraging people throwing dirty nappies at Jacob Rees-Mogg. But the joke being he won't know what's hit him, that works very well as a joke. But you've used up half your time now, Gary.
That's an aside. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I stopped working in the public service when they changed all our pensions, which turned out to be illegal. But so lots and lots of people in all the services decided to leave rather than stay on, which is why we've got crisis.
Because it made more economic sense for you to retire early than it did for you to carry on working under the changed terms and conditions.
That's right. Yeah. Now I'm not a police officer, but I do live in Devon and Cornwall, and down here, half of the police officers here are new.
Right.
And so you've got lots of inexperienced, well-meaning people, but they've got no experience or support to rely on, and that causes problems. But I'm very happily.
What would tempt you back? What might tempt you back into the workforce, if anything?
Well, do you know what I did? Because I'm very, very much into politics, and I did briefly flirt with political lobbying. I actually saw you at the Kebab Awards.
Oh, lovely!
You know the Kebab Awards?
Yes.
Yeah, so I got into doing a little bit of that and went to a few conferences and dipped my toe in that murky pond and thoroughly enjoyed it actually. But it just didn't. I wasn't hungry enough to keep at it.
No, and Devon's a long way from London as well. Do you go to Squires very often?
That fish and chip shop is excellent. My children love the milkshakes and the fish. But yeah,
well, it's interesting that you should bring milkshakes into the conversation. Gary, my friend Gary Barton, the doyen of painter and decorator artisans. Always, whenever anyone from Devon rings in, always texts me to say, ask him if he goes to Squires, the best fish and chip shop in Devon, which it indubitably is. Gary, take care. Andrew is in Le Mans, in France. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Big fan of the show. It's a great honour to talk to you.
Oh, don't be silly.
Finally, thank you.
No, of course, it's not an honour. It's a pleasure for both of us. What made you pick up the phone?
I fit in this category, so my wife. Going into COVID, we were at the absolute peak of our professional powers. My wife is a social worker. I was coming to the end of a career in the military.
Gosh.
And we were dabbling in the idea of maybe moving abroad, and we put that dream in the future. We thought, well, we'll do that. COVID grabbed me. It grabbed me by the ankles. I knew something was wrong with me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But having lifelong, very high fitness, the military kept me very fit. I was losing it very quickly. And I didn't know what it was. And I had a very close shave, and it nearly took me.
Really?
It nearly took me. I was actually on my own in France, and I woke up from a nap. I'd fallen asleep. I do not fall asleep in the day.
Right.
And it's like someone put a zip tie around my neck, and I couldn't breathe. I physically couldn't breathe. And I was staring out the window in France thinking, well, this is it. I'm going, you know, and I managed to relax enough to be able to breathe, and that actually happened to me 2 further times out of my control.
Good Lord.
That wasn't the main reason that we jumped, but shortly after that, we dissolved everything that we had. We gave away all the things that we thought were important, and we're now doing the dream. And I think...
I don't know, being in France, I don't know that you'd be part of this statistic, would you necessarily? But I guess the phrase economically inactive would apply to you either way.
Absolutely.
It's a profoundly unhelpful phrase.
We're living on 1/5 of what we were.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting, because that drives a coach and horses through almost all of the Tory rhetoric on this issue, because what they're going to do, I think it was in the speech yesterday, they're going to tighten up how the benefit system assesses capability for work. How on earth are you going to reach people who've decided they'd rather live on 1/5 of what they were previously living on by tightening up the benefit system and assessing capability for work? And you
It
possibly...
It can be done.
Well, clearly it can, but possibly this decision has saved your life.
I'm climbing back into fitness. I exercise every day.
How long were you in the military for?
I was a Royal Marine, so I used to jump out of helicopters and climb over mountains professionally.
Yeah.
And that obviously has diminished with age, but I think this is the key point. And I actually said this on the day I left the military. I stood up in front of a merry band of men, and I quoted Simon Mayo.
Yes.
And they all laughed.
That's a good tradition in the Royal Marines, isn't it?
Phrase that we all ignored through the 80s, which is enjoy yourself, because it is a lot later than you think.
It's a pretty strong message to live by, or at least to approach the end of your working life by. And of course, Andrew there, years in the Royal Marines, that's precisely who Ian was talking about when he said they're all lazy lefties. That's how they keep it alive. That's how they keep it afloat, with muppets like Ian who think that somehow these people are on their side when they're telling you that you've got to carry on toiling away until you're 80. That'll be the retirement age by the time I flipping get there. Andrew, thank you. My apologies to Etty and Stacey, Jennifer, Roger, Paul and Penny and others. The conversation's almost over, but I've left myself just enough time to remind you why I mentioned Amber Rudd earlier in the context of political disillusionment. Now, Amber Rudd, whose politics I do not share on many issues, but she resigned on principle. And it was only 2019, and she did it twice. She resigned as a Home Secretary because she made a mistake in Parliament that wasn't actually her fault about something that had happened when she wasn't actually Home Secretary. And then she resigned from Boris Johnson's government because of his plans to get rid of everybody that challenged his lies about a no-deal Brexit. So that's only 5 years ago. So if, like me, you worry about disillusionment in politics and it feels as if we're 100 years away from the days when people like John Profumo would have to spend their entire lives atoning for the sins that they committed in office, it was only 5 years ago that you saw decency in play in Parliament. And I use her as an example because, of course, she was sitting on the benches that I would be traditionally disagreeing with. That's just a thought. That's it from me for today. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.